See here, the counter's working, so we are live. I'm
Good.
very, very happy to be here with EA Tischler. I really appreciate your work, and I've been following you for quite some time. I'm very happy when you said that you'd be able to come on the show. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun, at least for me today, and a lot of listeners. I think are going to take a lot from what you had to say.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate you reaching out.
Um, one thing is, I was doing a little bit of homework on you. You grew up in California, but you were the director of instruction at Inverness, and now you're at Olympia Fields. You've been there since 2015. Just because I grew up just north of Detroit, and as we said, I've been in Hilton Head about a little over 30 years. But I found it interesting that the draw from California to the Midwest. Krista Dunton's here locally, and she grew up in Northern California and went to the University of Michigan. So I find I'm kind of curious as what the draw was, or what got you from California to the Midwest.
I actually was from California. I went to Hawaii, so I spent 16 years in Hawaii, and for part of the time, I split time between Hawaii and California. But
Mm-hmm.
when I teamed up with Mike Adams to do the bioswing dynamics stuff, traveling from Hawaii, back to the mainland to do education, it just became really a cumbersome sort of thing. So we were looking for some sort of a move, and luckily that position opened up at Inverness. My family's actually from Cleveland, Ohio, so I've got a bunch of aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff in Ohio,
Very cool.
and that kind of seemed like a kind of an attractive move, and so I was there for a few seasons, and then Olympia Fields reached out and recruited me to come over there. So been there for 9 years. My wife is a golf instructor also, and fortunately, she gets to teach at Olympia Fields during the season while we're there as well. So it's
Yes,
really nice.
I saw that she, I think, shared or liked the post I had that you were coming on, the coming soon on Twitter, and I did not know that she was an instructor. That's pretty cool too. And well, the thing that really stuck out to me was it said that she's certified, and I'm wait a second, did she have to go through your certification? That just sitting there at the dining room table and hearing you talk about it for years, it wasn't enough that she had to officially go through it.
She is, I mean, she is so committed to studying and learning. It's unbelievable. I mean, she was one of the top first key instructors, US Kids certified, TPI certified, gone through all that. She's been to almost all the educations that we put on with Bioswing Dynamics. She wanted to do it. She went through the testing. Daily we have conversations about, just patterns and techniques and what works best for people. And she's done a great job. She's got a bunch of juniors that are doing extremely well in tournaments, national tournaments and stuff. She's a lot like me. We don't really publicize that. As a matter of fact, Scott McCarron kind of got on me the other day. We had kind of we didn't work with each other for a couple of years, and we're back working together. And he said, "Hey," he says, when we were doing well and I won the Charles Schwab Cup, you did not promote yourself enough, with the work you did with me." And interestingly enough, that's kind of how I've been. I always give the players credit, and I don't put it all out there on social media. Maybe I need to start doing more of that, as Scott said. But she's the same way. She's been doing a lot of great work, and she's got her own sort of brand, Fun Style Golf, which is really neat.
Not to jump off on the topic too far, but golf instruction, and listening to what you were saying about how you don't promote it, because I get told I need to promote stuff more as well. Now, I have to redo my social media site because it got wrongfully canceled. I mean, just all of a sudden, all of them disappeared, and I couldn't find out why. But so is the world of social media. But I'm not a big self promoter. If one of my students does good, I'm like, well, that's what I'm here to do. Why would I promote that?
Right.
And it's like my mentality, but is for what we do in helping people, there's a lot of satisfaction in that, but it seems like you could have success in your career and be unfulfilled. And it sounds like you and your wife have success, and you also get your fulfillment out of the joy that what you do and what your students are able to do after that. You're able to help somebody. So you have, it's like a double positive that comes out of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because like you, I played in college, and then I wanted to play professional golf, and I played some. I've won over 30 professional tournaments, small stuff, but I had an accident in 1992, and for 4 years nobody would touch me. In '96, after my first operation, they said I'd never play golf again. And so I actually got to the point where I played pretty good golf again, and been back to tour school and that sort of stuff, and got back to even I think a +5 or +5.4 after my coming back from my accident. Um, so interestingly enough, I came from the player's mindset. So, but how did I end up coaching? Besides the fact that I had an injury and I was looking for something else to do. I was already sort of poised for that because fortunately I met a gentleman named Fred Shoemaker back in the '80s, and when I would go work with him, he would always be encouraging me to do certain things that were even beyond just what the player needed to do. And as a matter of fact, I'll never forget the very first time I did any coaching. He says, "Hey, you got to come to this inner game school," because he was the head instructor for Timothy Galloway's inner game of golf schools. And so I go down to Carmel and I show up and they do the introduction and they got people divided into groups, and I'm not in any group or anything. And they start naming the coaches for the groups and they get to the last group and it's like, yeah, and he's going to be your coach. And I'm like, what? And he just kind of looked at me and put his hand down like that. And they sent everybody out to warm up. He says, look, these drills as good as anybody. Just run them through the drills and everything's going to work out just fine. And I asked him about that years later why he did it. He just said, hey, if I thought that if your coach or if your playing career didn't pan out the way you wanted, I thought you'd be a great coach. And so he's the one that really got me interested in it all. And I'm a sort of an incessant researcher anyway. I study everything and get my hands on everything. He used to say that he would give me a tip, and 3 months later, I wrote a book on it. And that's just sort of the way my mind works. So I think there's a lot of, just what I do, being a researcher and loving to help people and see people reach their potential, that I was sort of, I think a natural for coaching that way. And even in college, there were players on other teams I would be playing against. And after the rounds, they'd reach out to me and they're like, hey, do you mind if I come, and meet with you at a range somewhere? And, can you help me out? And I was more than happy to help them. To the begrudgingly of my coach, my team coach, but I was more than happy to help people even when I was in school. So
you have a very effective and very good and unique. I'll say it unique because it's not the cookie cutter PGA Tour coach or PGA coach system. And I was thinking today, how am I going to ask you this question? Because it's been developed over many years, and I found it extremely intriguing and very useful, and have used a lot of it. I guess that I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole and talk for weeks on how you, all the different facets and everything you've done. But how did you get started down that path? Because you mentioned when Fred would give you something, you would go research and write a book on it. Was that the genesis of the theory that you developed? Or was
so
there something else that you
no,
saw and just?
actually, it started much earlier. When I was young, I mean, I played every sport. I played football, basketball, baseball, water polo, tennis. I started martial arts when I was 9. I did gymnastics starting at the age of 2, tumbling when you're 2, and I
Mhm.
did that till I was like 16. And I did I did like the rings and the high bar and all that stuff. So like my gymnastics coaches realized, they didn't say it this way, but they realized that I was an upper core person. So I had a lot of strength in my shoulder girdle, and just from the core up. And I didn't do any floor. I hated the floor exercises. I think I did one in an exhibition once along the way. But I was really good at the rings. It was probably my strongest discipline, and then the high bar and parallel bar. I was pretty good at. But they recognized that I sort of had a certain attribute there. Then when I was doing the martial arts through 3 different disciplines, I was fortunate to meet people that had sort of an awareness again of me and my build and my body and how it worked, and tailored things to me. And I did a lot of studying in the martial arts. I read a lot about different forms and read just about everything Bruce Lee ever wrote. And like he started in a style called Wing Chun Kung Fu because his Sifu said that he had one leg that was shorter than the other. Most people don't know this. But in that form, there was no limitation for him with the initial stance and everything. And that's why he was started. I'm like, oh, so my martial arts instructors are telling me my body's different and I have strengths here and weaknesses there. My gymnastics coaches were saying that. And then my dad's an engineer for NASA. I think I've got kind of a scientific mind through him. I have a theory of genetic transfer. Even with experiences, our experiences get encoded down into the DNA level, cellular
Hmm.
level in our body, and I believe that there's transfer there. And so would talk to him about a lot of things. But I noticed, for example, his swing, we had similarities that seemed to be kind of genetic because it was very, very similar. But then we had these differences also, and I'm like, well, what's the difference? Why is there similarity and why is there difference? So this is all, I mean, before the age of 13, this is going on in my head about how this works. And so I started studying kinesiology books when I was 13. My mom realized that I was great at math, could study or do whatever I wanted in math all day long. I hated reading, I hated writing, but she recognized that I loved to read things I was interested in. So I got golf books and I got, books on exercise. I remember like in the early 80s, Muscle and Fitness
Hmm.
did exercise, kinesiology of exercises. It was usually a one-page thing. And I tore all those out of all the muscle and fitness books. I still have it in photo albums in my mom's house buried somewhere. And I would study that stuff and she would recognize that I was tearing those out of muscle and fitness and like, okay, let's, get kinesiology books and stuff. So I mean, at 13, I'm reading kinesiology books. So I was studying a lot about the differences in the body and how the body worked and it actually helped when I had that accident in '92. So I had a bone go through a tendon in my shoulder. I'm missing a muscle in my right shoulder. So I had my shoulder blade was pulled off my rib cage scapula. I had four vertebrae locked together. Over 4 years, I had four atrophied muscles in my shoulder. And by the time I had the second operation done, they were convinced for sure I'd never play golf again. And so I invented a physical therapy process that I realized that you had to strengthen the decelerators first and then the accelerators, and then you go back and forth, back and forth. My orthopedic surgeon was the third string quarterback for the 49ers behind Montana and Young.
Hmm.
And like he's like, I walked into his office, I mean, man, you're really familiar. And he goes, oh, well, I played in the NFL. I go, you played for the 49ers. You're the third string quarterback. He goes, nobody remembers that. I go, but you only played in preseason games. And my dad's a big 49ers fan coming from the Bay Area. So we went to some preseason games. So anyway, we kind of hit it off. And when I started getting muscle bulk back and functionality back and getting strong, he's like, what are you doing? Because this is not supposed to happen. So
Were
I
you doing,
explained,
not to cut you off, but were you
yeah,
doing, when you talk about the decelerators, were you doing eccentric uh, therapy for the muscle
yeah. So
versus the
there,
concentric?
it's mixed actually. So I had to start with just with the like how TheraBands and exercise bands. Now
Hmm.
it was surgical tubing back then. It didn't even have an exercise band name to it.
Yes, I remember that.
And so yeah, so when you're like all muscles, I don't want to make this too complicated, but all muscles can be accelerators and decelerators. It just depends on what their activity is in the given motion or the given
Hmm.
action, right? So when they're in the deceleration phase, how do you strengthen them the best? And there's a lot of theories out there. This has really evolved over time. But my approach, just like coaching, was I had to tailor it to me. I had to figure out for myself how did I actually get that muscle strengthening in the deceleration phase, and which means I use multiple techniques to do it. And so usually it's more eccentric training at that point, you
Hmm.
know, um, but not necessarily. So again, it gets kind of complicated, especially when you're looking at a shoulder joint that has, it's the most complicated joint in the body. So in the given action, there could be both of those, activities happening at the same time with different muscles that are important to the deceleration phase or the acceleration phase. So it gets really complicated when we look at the shoulder joint. But the basic idea is think of like if you're going into extension, through the ball, who are the decelerators, at that point, as we're going to extension or what I call counter extension, so the traps. the
Hmm.
lats. These are the muscles that are holding the brunt of the deceleration at that point, right? So that's something that you have to say, okay, so if the injury I was hurt, let's say, was going through the ball, let's say somebody was hurt, moving through the ball, their club got stuck in ice plant, something like that, right? So at that point, those muscles would have been part of the deceleration process. And so, there's sort of this theory that you can only accelerate as much as you can decelerate. Well, that's not really the case because you can hurt yourself. You can accelerate more than you can decelerate and hurt yourself. But there's sort of this neurological, understanding inside us that it doesn't want us to do that. So usually it'll try to protect us before we get there.
Hmm.
Okay. And so, okay, but my theory was if I could strengthen the decelerators, then the accelerators would then want to work at a higher level. I'd be able to work them at a higher level and it'd be able to catch up to what I could do on the deceleration side. That was just my theory. And so I tested it and it worked and I got better and I got stronger and I got back to where I could play the game. So then my orthopedic surgeon, Daryl Kahn, had an injury and they could never get rid of it. And he had this knot in his back and they'd give him injections. It'd go away for a while, come back. He'd have somebody massage it, it'd go away, come back. And I'm like, well, where did that injury come from? And he explained it to me. And it was in relations to his throwing action. And so what I had him do is think of like your throwing action. So I had him grab a handle with the tubing on it, and I had him go in reverse, the reverse motion of his throw. And first he did that until he strengthened it enough. And then once that was strong and got stronger, then he would strengthen the forward direction. And then once that caught up, he would strengthen the rearward direction more. And then he would strengthen the forward direction more. And then once you get to a point of high functionality, you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And sure enough, his knot went away. Knot that he had in that injury area that he had problems with for 7, 8 years went away and never came back. He's like, we've got something here.
Hmm.
So my physical therapist at the time was an ex Major League Baseball player who got injured and became a physical therapist. So he started using it in his practices. And the two of them, when they would go around to conferences, they started introducing this, at conferences, that they went to. And it's used pretty much everywhere around the world now in clinics. We should have patented it or something.
Should have patented it. Right.
But it's the same idea of like P&F techniques. All that sort of stuff has come out of that research as well. So yeah, so it worked wonderfully. So in that, what I recognized at that period of time was that what was missing in sports rehab, because throughout my injury, I was at Scripps Sports Medicine, which is supposed to be one of the top ones in the country, and I wasn't improving. I wasn't getting any better. But what I realized is that like the plane of motion that related to my injury, I was not being trained in the plane of motion that related to my injury. So that was the other big piece of the puzzle, is that we had to train or rehab in the plane of motions that matched the athletic activities that related to our injuries. So understanding, strengthen the decelerators first, then the accelerators, and then make sure you're doing it in the plane of motion that's related to your injury for the sport that you're playing made a huge difference in the ability for athletes to recover.
Does related to the plane of motion of the injury differ from the plane of motion that the muscle works in?
Yeah, because you think of like, you know, if I'm actually dropping my arm down into the slot, right? I mean, my
Hmm.
upper arm and my lower arm are at different planes, and then the muscles, the way they attach to anatomy, are working in different planes in relation to that, right? Because they're not exactly parallel to where the bones are, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, like I actually am going to be changing directions because from the slot to the delivery plane, or like what Dr. Kwan would call the functional swing plane now, right? Which I've just called the delivery plane, is that we're really pretty much just planar in the delivery plane or in the functional swing plane, if you want to say it that way. So my arm is not on that plane as I'm delivering the club in that plane, right? And of course, my torso and all the muscles in my torso are learning to support this planar activity during delivery, right? From delivery to full extension. And they all have to be doing that in some sort of a combined activity that gets the force applications going where we want them to. And I mean, these force vectors are all over the place, from the body to the hands to the club to, the elbow to I mean, so
And they're
yeah,
constantly
so
changing. You're right. Yeah,
they're
they're
changing.
constantly.
They're always changing, right? So when I say that in the plane of motion, I mean it's like it's this activity is the plane of motion, and then it's like, how does the body have to accommodate that? How does the body create the force applications that gets the bat or the racket or the golf club moving in this planing activity? And so each muscle is doing their own activity. As a matter of fact, I wrote when I was at Scripps Sports Medicine, and for 2 years I wasn't improving. I wrote my own case study on every single exercise they gave me and what muscles were active at, for doing their job at what parts of the activity. And I wrote where the pain was in the body, throughout those periods, each segment of that. And the doctor at Scripps Sports Medicine, because of my conclusion, I had my conclusion was that I had torn pec minor muscles. And then by that time, I had a problem with my coracal brachialis as well. And something else was going on subclavically that I wasn't aware of. And it turned out I have a fairly high tolerance for pain, so I just didn't realize how bad it really was.
Hmm.
And I was doing Alexander technique for posturing, so I was making myself stay in proper posture no matter what the pain level was. And the doctor says, well, your conclusion, it just can't be right because your body would be all contorted and you wouldn't be where you were. And it just doesn't make sense. And he said it would be a total fluke if that happened. And I said, well, my life's Mr. Fluke, so maybe there's something to that. And but I just wouldn't let myself get all contorted. I just sort of lived with the pain. I gave the exact same case study to Daryl Kahn, and he read it. He says, "This makes total sense. I think you hit the nail on the head. What's going on here, based upon his assessments at that time." And it was eventually found out that I had two of the three pec minors who were shredded. He said they looked like shredded beef or beef enchilada. I was missing a muscle in my right shoulder. Coracal brachialis was atrophied. Rhomboid was atrophied. Subscapularis was atrophied. Obviously, the pec minors were sort of obliterated. And so yeah, so
Nothing on the imaging that they might have taken of that showed that you had
so
tears or it was all torn to
so
pieces.
the it was so bad. I had like the one muscle detached. I have a missing muscle. It detached, and it literally just decayed, and it just sort of covered everything up. So plus they back then they weren't doing a lot of um, I would say research or operations on these type of injuries. So they literally said we don't even know what we'd be looking for because we haven't seen this before.
Mm.
Turned out that most likely, Dr. Khan said that when I was doing the rings, I had torn pec minors, and then probably in the martial arts during grappling, I had torn them some more. So this is something that happened over years and years and years of different things happening. Plus, he said that like my range of motion was hypermobile in certain areas, which made me really good as an athlete in certain areas, but also prone to injury. They'll say that with like pitchers and stuff that have hypermobility, they can throw faster, create more movement on the ball, but then they have more chance of getting injured.
Yeah.
So he says
Yes.
this
They don't
this
have the
sort of
stability. Yeah.
yeah. So his assessment was once he saw the case study that I wrote and he did his assessment. He said best thing I could just do is go in and do a scope, see what we find, fix what we can the first time, and then after that reassess the situation and then kind of fix the rest of it in the second operation. So and it was successful. It went actually very well. So, but
So,
throughout all that, my mind was always thinking of like what's same about our anatomies and what's different than our anatomies. What do I need to do to tailor this so that I can get better? And then like when he told me about his injury, I was like, what does he need to do specifically for him so that he can get better? So I think my mind's always sort of worked in that direction. I kind of think I got away from that, but that's sort of the point was that, you know, when I read The Golf Machine when I was young, and I always took the idea of there's issues of sameness and issues of difference. And so if we can understand that, like, people like to say, well, our anatomies are all the same because we got 10 fingers and 10 toes and two arms and two legs.
mhm.
Well, that's not necessarily 100% true across the board, is it? Right. But in general theory, I get it. Right. But, you look at the pelvis and the hip joints, some people's are angled more outward, some are more
Mhm.
inward, some are more forward, some are more side. I mean, anybody that studies this will tell you they're not the same, right? And so they are, even though in general our anatomies are designed to operate the same way, they're not exactly the same. And so that became really interesting to me, is that what are the differences and what makes the difference? Like one of my sayings I say to my students all the time is, what makes the difference in your learning is knowing the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you can't identify the difference, you'll never make the difference, right? And so that was important to me. Like, okay, here's the things that are the same. This is the general, sort of, medical, description of things. But when we get down to the nitty gritty, we're not the same. So what is different, and how does that make a difference? And then I would look at golf swings. Like specifically, it was me and my dad. Why did we have things that look the same, that seem to be genetically there? And then, but why did we do things differently? What brought those differences about? And I was interested in figuring that out. And then I just applied it to studying golf swings, throughout the years.
I follow Sad Guru on social media. He's a very interesting person. And I think I even saw him playing golf on a couple of his posts on Instagram, which was pretty cool. But one of his posts that was a shorter one, on the Instagram. I've listened to him on Rogan, and I know some of his lectures can go quite long. But the one was, somebody asked him, in modern society, do people think too much? And he kind of chuckled to himself, and he said, absolutely not. I don't think people give deep thought, or spend enough time in deep thought. And I only bring that up because as you describe, as you were learning the body and you figuring out solutions to things that whatever you were working on, that they didn't give you the answers, and you went deeper into those things to say, I'm not going to accept the answer that you're giving me. There's got to be a way to do this. And you were giving it deep thought. And I only say that because one of the theories I had, that I was told I was crazy and I was just too young and I didn't know what I was talking about many years ago. And I got this from watching the swings that went in the early 90s, when Nick Faldo and Greg Norman were back and forth as #1 golfer in the world. And I'm looking at them, and for their size, Faldo's obviously a monster. The guy's, what
Right.
is he, 6'3" and 230 pounds. And Norman, ironically enough, was not as big in person as I thought he would be, as he looked on
Right.
TV.
Yeah.
But what I noticed about them was, for the ratios, which is what I refer to it as, that Faldo's, if I remember right, Faldo's shoulders were not quite as the same. His hips were maybe a little bit bigger than his shoulder width. At least in comparison to Norman's. Norman's
Right.
shoulders were wider than his hip, and Norman always seemed to me to take the club more down the line. And then guys who had more as their shoulders got more and more rounded, like a Nicholas or even a Bobby Jones, it was really rounded shoulders, that the club tended to come back. And just thinking about the the structure of that if you have a shorter lever on top and a longer lever, meaning your hip girdle on the bottom, that the top one's going to turn, and it's going to rotate in. It's going to rotate around itself, but it's also going to rotate tighter than the bottom one is. And I'm like, well, all these people are telling you to me, because I'm 6'5", but for my slope shoulder, everyone's trying to get me to take the club down the line. This was in the early 90s, when that was the
Right.
thing to do and ship. And I'm like, I don't think I should be. And they, well, who've you taught and who's this? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I just gave it some deep thought. Now, deep
Right.
thought back then, people would say, well, what the hell is that? But, it's interesting how you learn these things as you go along. You can kind of piece them together. But, and then, not to beat this topic up, but Jason Sutton, who's here locally, and Jason's in the top 100. He had posted, he was at a seminar, and somebody had done the deep study on this, the scientific, and they were presenting on here, here's a hip girdle structure, and here's a shoulder structure, and you get an arm length, leg length, and all these different things are particular to an individual and how they move the club in space. And I'm like, I texted him when he's at the seminar. I said, is it this, this, and this? He said, yeah. How'd you know? I said, because I thought of this about 20 years ago.
Right.
And or 20, and people told me I was absolutely crazy. So that's my tangent on giving something some deep thought. And I'm not talking about deep thought just sitting in a stoplight. I'm talking about over months and years that
Right.
you're listening or watching to things, and you're like, that doesn't add up for me or a student I'm working with or somebody I worked with last week or whatever, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
But your career, and I guess I could say a lot of mine, is kind of not purposely bucking the trends, but it's like, hey, everybody, wait a second. You can't put everybody in a silo. And now we have more silos than we did 20 years ago. But it
Right.
still, I think, gets into siloing. And I think the matchups is a very good term. It might start to be overused now, maybe. But
Right.
I think you coined that a long time ago. I know George Gankis has gotten made it popular again, but I also think it's spot on.
Yeah, and I saw a post this morning actually where somebody was talking about don't think that because you don't have a formal education that you can't be as educated on a topic as somebody that does. So to your
Hmm.
deep thought, point, because there's plenty of people that have done that. I mean, certainly just like with the ground forces and me recognizing how vertical force had a play in power production in the golf swing, and I was told I was crazy by different biomechanics even that hadn't been looking at it, but I'd been looking at the data and I'd seen what was going on there, and even like just the kinematics, I call it the vertical kinematic sequence and the horizontal kinematic sequence because generally the kinematic sequence that's talked about is a rotational kinematic sequence. And so understanding like how all these things relate to each other is really, really important. And so when somebody says it has to be a certain way, but you can immediately pick up people that are supposedly outliers. Like I don't believe in outliers. I don't think they're outliers. I think I think if you believe that there's outliers, then your paradigm is an outlier. Your
Hmm.
paradigm does not consider all valid possibilities. So I think like me, have been interested in why, what's possible. Like, I mean, Fred Shoemaker's The Art of the Possibility sort of concept, is really resonating with me because I was interested in all viable patterns, not what is the best or what is the best for everybody or what's the most ideal or what theoretically would be the best. So understanding that there are like the golf machine, just in the golf machine, there were over 3 trillion possibilities of combining everything, right? And it didn't even have all the biomechanical features that I'm looking at. And so if you actually do the math on it, there's more possible patterns than there are people walking the planet. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? So it's like, and way more, like exponentially more. So we have to look at the individual and we have to figure out what's best for this individual. And that takes opening your mind to a lot more possibilities instead of like the old KISS method, keep it simple, right?
Hmm.
It's like keep it simple is great for communicating something to a student to get them to learn that thing right now. But if you're really trying to understand what's going to make them their best, you got to open your mind to the possibility that they need to maybe do it in a way that you haven't seen yet. And that's kind of where I've always been trying to say, okay, what more is possible out there? What other patterns are valid? And ultimately, it came down to if you can understand the individual influences. Like, I don't have to understand every viable pattern that exists. I'll never get to that point. I won't live long enough, to do that. But if I understand all the influences that go into creating all the patterns, then I can help each individual as their own sort of puzzle, so to speak, learn how to get all the pieces together because I just have to understand what their influences are. And so this is where the screening process and the matchups come into play. And to your point, I do think the term matchup is overused. I think it's overused in this sense that things are defined as absolutely having to be matchups when they're not absolutely having to be matchups. We people in general like to believe in simplifying it. They like to believe that it's a sort of a more romantic or juicy story if you say if this then that, right?
Hmm.
Not if that this there's 10 other possibilities from there, right? But you know if what they don't realize is that if you know what that one thing is, you screen for it, and if there are 10 possibilities branching out from that one thing, I've eliminated it down to 10 because there's two other options over here that have 10 options, so to speak, right? So I've eliminated 20 to get it down to 10. And then the next thing I learn about that will take those 10 and eliminate it down to 5. And then the next thing I learn about that golfer, I'll bring those 5 and bring it down to 2 or 3. So like I just follow that pattern until I found exactly what it is. And there's honestly, there are dynamic patterns out there that are important that we don't know how to screen for yet. And so the only way when I get it down to one of those is to say, okay, let's do each one and let's see how you perform. Which one
That,
actually is easiest for you?
that's very interesting because I distinctly remember, oh, it's got to be 15 years ago, maybe more. Sports Illustrated did a very, very long article. It had to be probably 15 pages in their magazine, maybe pushing 20. And the article was on, are home run hitters born or do they develop? And I'll tell you where I'm going with this when I get to the end, or for anybody listening, what the hell are you bringing up home run hitters and what EA just talked about? But the gist of the article was that very good hitters and Howard, what was his name? Played for Philadelphia, big guy, big home run hitter. I cannot remember his name. He was one of the test subjects. Obviously, I think Barry Bonds was in it at that time, and a whole bunch of guys. But what they found out was that the best hitters are able to pick up motions of the pitcher, how they're holding the ball when it's, they look in
Mm-hmm.
the square above their head. Then for every incremental movement the pitcher makes after that point, that the better hitters could narrow down the space that the ball was going to come in to a better degree
Yeah.
than other hitters could. And as I got to thinking about that, because I did martial arts a number, I did karate, I did jujitsu and judo, and I was talking to some of the instructors about this, and they're like, yeah, that's exactly right. Because I mean, they had been doing it for some of them for 40 years. It's like,
Right.
because if a guy moves a certain way, that he can't sweep your leg if he's going to go this way. There's no way possible.
Yeah.
He's not a ghost.
There's tells in the motion for sure.
Yes, and then I had that discussion with some very well respected coaches, and they didn't want to agree with me. I said, "Well, okay, don't agree with me. It's not my study. Sports Illustrated. You can go read the article." But if you're a coaching and you can narrow down these millions of options, um, then you can, where you're looking is a much smaller window of
Right.
where the problem is, instead of this giant big door or just wide open. I think, and as I look at it over back in my career, that's the difference between a young teacher or coach who knows a little bit and someone who's very seasoned and been doing it, between a Butch Harmon and someone who's coming out of, or as an assistant, and they're just learning the X's and O's. There's a
Yeah.
very
Absolutely.
big difference in that.
Yeah, and to the batters, I mean, there's, Hogan thought there is a relationship between batting and golf. So, who's argue with him, right? And but it's interesting. You look at batting, you look at the way it's taught. I mean, it's largely taught one way now. Like it's kind of like this is the best way. But what's interesting is that you look at the way that most home run batters are taught. Most of them have to be really strong, and then most of them were on steroids for a long time. But then you go and you look at the Ken Griffey seniors and juniors and the Darryl Strawberries, and go back to the Mickey Mantles and the Roger Marises. You know, how come then none of them had to bulk up to be home run batters?
Mm-hmm.
And they're
I think
still batters.
Maris's bat was like ridiculously heavy too.
Yeah, exactly. And there's batters in today that don't have to bulk up and can still be home run batters. So like, what's the difference? Again, back to the sameness and difference sort of topic. And so I think the more they start to understand that, the more they can actually teach a variety of batting styles that will benefit a lot more players over time. And the same thing's happening in golf. When we understand these sort of attributes of golfers, like golfers do have tells. So like when I'm looking at a motion that I don't have a screening for, okay. So like there's a pattern, I call it the Walter Hagen pattern. So like I think one of the next big things, I've been talking about it for decades, but I'm putting more of it out there now. Sometimes I'm slow to put it out on Instagram and stuff because it's amazing how often it just gets copied and nobody references you. Like for decades I've been doing this drill where you set up on an impact bag, and I show people how their pivot can push the impact bag.
Yeah, I saw that. That was very
Yeah.
interesting.
So the one that you saw, I'm demonstrating doing it from behind. You're behind the
Mm-hmm.
arms. You're behind the club because everybody's sort of, hey, you got to get in front of it, right? And there are people that can get the body to pull the arms through. So are you pulling the arms through pushing? Are you pushing the arms through pushing with your pivot? Or are you more of the same at the same time? I usually, when I do introduce something, I show the non-conventional version, right? Because most people that need it right now are not the people doing it conventionally. They're the people doing it that need to do it in a non-conventional manner. But interesting, and one of the guys, it's one of the coaches that's come to our educations, and I respect them. He's a good guy, and he's supported me in the past. But he ends up posting it on his Instagram thread, but he didn't even mention where he saw it from. Now, and I know that that's where he got it from because nobody's done it forever. And I finally post it because some of my students say, why don't you post something on that? And so finally I do. And then all of a sudden I see other people doing it, right? But, to that extent, it's like that we have horizontal actions and diagonal actions or tilting actions. So side
Hmm.
bend's been a big thing, right? Got to have more side bend. And I'm like, look, so many people just aren't built to have side bend. I truly believe Will Zalatoris is a player that's not built to have that much side bend, and that's
God,
what
and he's
led,
got a ton of it.
yeah, and that's what led to his back problems at such a young age. I think Victor Hovland's not built to have that much side bend, but he's sort of an athletic freak like Dustin Johnson. Obviously, he's not as big as Dustin, but I mean, he
Hmm.
works out like crazy and he's an athletic freak. So he can handle that, but it's going to have wear and tear on his body someday. And if we can really start to understand, like, where along this continuum of the horizontals and the diagonals are you, you'll actually eliminate a lot of injury. Okay, so for example, Nick Faldo, always said, hold your levels, right?
Hmm.
Everything's more horizontal. You're pivoting in a very horizontal manner, not this tilty stuff. I'm a tilter, so like way back in the day, Mac O'Grady was watching me, and he asked me about my swing, and we talked for a few hours, and I explained to him my anchor idea, my counter extension idea, which he called the look, but I was a tilter, and back then everybody was, you got to load the right side, you got to turn
Yes.
level. That was the whole deal back then, right? And I'm like, but I'm a tilter, and I have a certain degree of tilts that I need, so I need side bend in my swing, and that's what allows me to get to this counter extension that's chest high and straight out, parallel to ground at chest high, which you just weren't seeing people do. And at the time, I was exiting left like crazy, which nobody was doing, and so and he really liked all that stuff. And so interesting, like, he went out and I had a 3 hour conversation with him, whatever it was. My ex-wife and I were with him. It was actually, we played in back-to-back groups for 2 days in a tournament at the Queen Mary Open. He watched me on the range both days, he said. And he said he watched me play every shot for 2 days. And he ran out to the parking lot to stop me after the second round. And we ended up talking. So he went away and did all his own research and everything. But,
Hmm.
beyond those few things that I gave him about Hogan was a front anchor golfer, Sam Snead was a center anchor golfer. And I said, as you know, a lot of people are taught to load the rear side. And his original coach was a guy named Joe Norwood from California, who's a right side load guy. So I knew he was very familiar with that. And so anyway, they went away. He went away, did his research on it. Mike and Andy did their research on it. And then we get stack and tilt. I mean, so this is where the whole tilting stuff really started to get, the seed was planted and it
Hmm.
blossomed from there. But all along, I've been saying there are guys that need less tilt, that need to be more horizontal. And so you look at Adam Scott. Adam Scott's like Mr. Neutral. Everything about him is Mr. Neutral. So if you want to say really horizontal, Walter Hagen, the poster child of horizontal over here, right? Now we got these
Hmm.
super, super side bend tilty guys over here. Adam Scott's right in the middle.
Joaquin Neiman. Yeah,
Yeah,
Neiman's
Joaquin
about as
Neiman,
much.
and Nick Dunlap does it, right? It's very popular these days. So, but I think that'll be neutralized over time when people understand it more. So it's like, where are you on this continuum of horizontals and tilts? Well, if you take the neutral point to Walter Hagen, that would be the horizontal side of the spectrum. Now the question becomes just how horizontal are you? Walter Hagen kept massive forward bend in his swing,
Hmm.
right? Right on into the finish. I mean, talk about the original walkthrough guy. It was Walter Hagen. I mean, Gary Player, Hall of Famer, great golfer, tremendous player. But I'm sorry, Walter Hagen was the first guy, right?
Not to cut you off, but just real quick, because somebody out there who's a golfer and they love golf, that can you briefly explain? And I know you can that horizontal versus tilting as we're talking about the rotation of the torso in the swing.
Yeah, so just think of just to make it simple, think of the vertical axis of the torso, and then the shoulders and hips would be rotating parallel or perpendicular to that vertical axis, right? Whereas a tilter's got more side bend. They're adding much more side bend, into the activity before they rotate or as they're rotating. So tilting being in the side bend direction, and
Hmm.
horizontal being more across that plane of the vertical axis of the torso, just to give a simple, description. And so years ago, I made the choice that this is where I try to use the KISS, keep it simple, is
Hmm.
that you got to try to describe it as you're talking to a 5-year-old, basically. If they can understand what you're saying, then anybody can understand what you're saying, right? Instead of using all the medical terms and
Yes, that's gotten very popular in the last couple of
yeah,
years.
yeah. And so So, that's why I use tilting as a general term instead of side bend, because there's some other things that go on that can add tilt besides just side bend. Um, you'll see these golfers that are horizontal on the horizontal side, and there's all these attributes that I'm looking for, and there's certain ones that I don't know how to screen for. So a couple days ago, I was working with a PGA professional and his brother, and when I work, and they both have similar, things because of genetics again, but they're both different in certain areas. And so the one brother got him, striping it, swinging really good, and the other brother comes in. And it's like, so the first thing I did was, talk to him and identify again the differences between him and his brother. So I got that straight. I didn't have their old screening sheets in front of me, so I wanted to get that sense. And then immediately, the thing that we were going to be working on, it was obvious to me that he was not going to do it the same way that his brother did it. And so it was like, okay, so now I got to figure out where is he in this continuum. But I had no screening to do it. So it took a while for us to just, have him do 3 variations of the same drill. And once I saw the one that was more repeatable and the shots started coming off in the proper window and his feedback, interestingly enough, like I said, in reality, if we look at I call swing straight, swing right, and swing left golfers is one of the terms that I use. So based upon your
Mhm.
reference line at address, do you tend to create more of a positive path, a more neutral path, or more negative path? And so he's a swing right golfer, and for 75% of swing right golfers that I coach, as the club gets longer, the path window is less and less positive. So there's a 4-degree
Hmm.
path window that we identify, and we'll see like somebody has a 9-iron. It could be 5 to 9 degrees positive is their path window for that 9-iron. But the driver may actually be 1 left to 3 right. Technically
That's crazy. That's amazing.
even technically 2 left to 2 right. Catching it on the upswing is still a swing right golfer pattern. Even though they're like, yeah, but that's actually 2 left to right. Isn't that neutral? I'm like, so they got one club that's neutral, and every other club has a positive path window. They're a swing right golfer. That's kind of how I
Mhm.
describe it, right?
Yeah,
Well, it's interesting.
13 out of 14, one direction means they are.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, interestingly enough, all of a sudden he starts doing the one that we identified was easiest for him, and he even said it was more effortless, and it just felt better, and everything about it was better performance. And as the clubs got longer, all of a sudden he started creating a more positive path window. And then I said, okay, wait a second. I said, we gotta we gotta look at this. What's going on here? Because 75% of the time it goes the other way, right?
Mhm.
And then when I was talking to him and his brother, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, you know what? He's always been this way. His the longer the club gets, the more he pushes it. So like when he squares the face of the path, it's a bigger push with a longer club than it is a shorter club. And he always is hooking the longer clubs too much. Well, wonder why. He thinks the target's here and his path is going more that way, and his mind's trying to work the ball back towards the target more, so he hooked it more, right?
Mhm.
But once he realized that, you know what, you don't have to try to get the ball back to some specific zero line. Whatever line you're set up on, if you're parallel to the zero line, you create a positive path. What we want to do is identify, after we know what your path window is, what's your face window? And so there's a 2-degree face window. And so what's your best face window? Is it 1 to 3 closed? Is it 0 to 2 closed? Is it a half open to 1.5 closed? And so I swing left as my stock shot. I've played power fade most of my life, and my face window is actually a 0.5 degree closed to 1.5 open. I don't like fades that are more than 1.5 degrees open. That's just my preference. And because I have that preference, my mind learned not to let it get more than 1.5 open most of the time. But since it's a 2-degree face window, guess what? I get 0.5 degree closed club faces at times. And Nicholas sort of described the same thing. By the way, a 0.5 degree closed shot outside looks pretty darn straight. It looks like it just went where you're aiming it, right?
Yes.
But Nicholas used to say that, right? He would, the flag's on the left. He's aiming at the middle of the green. He's curving the ball there. He doesn't even care if he curves it all the way there. He just wants to close the gap, because if he's closing the
Hmm.
gap, he's got a makeable birdie putt, right?
He's closer to the hole. Yeah.
Yeah, and every once in a while when he's trying to draw it over there, he'll get a half a degree open fade that, okay, you know what, I need to make some 45 footers every now and then. Like, what a great mindset, right? So, but the interesting thing with this player was that once we identified one thing that was within one of his dynamic patterns and he recognized that it actually was best, it actually led us in the direction of understanding one other thing that he just did, that he's fought his whole career. Now he doesn't have to fight it anymore. Now he can learn to use it. And
Hmm.
then obviously once you do that, then you just learn to aim it, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think
You
too
just
many people,
change this alignment. Yeah.
yeah,
It
change
just.
your alignment. Yeah. So it's like, too many people are taught you're supposed to set up this way and the ball's supposed to go there.
Hmm.
Well, that's not how Hall of Famers do it. I mean, Lee Trevino set up on a line and said, okay, I set up on that line, it went over there. I set up on this line, I make a great swing, it goes over there. I set up on this line, I made another great swing, it went over there. Okay, I'm gonna line this so I can play this thing, and now then he's in the Hall of Fame, right? I mean, I think more people need to learn to do that, and you will learn your specific sort of idiosyncrasies that are valid. That and if you can identify those things and then find an approach, like, whether it's my New Horizons golf and Power 3 golf stuff, or bioswing stuff, or with bioswing dynamics Mike and I did, or the ultimate golf lesson with Chip and Terry doing. If you can actually go to a system like that or an approach and it says this is valid and here's why, that's powerful, because then anytime somebody tells you to change it, you can go, you know what, I've been down that road. I'm not built to do it that way. And here's why. I can do it this way. So if something's inconsistent, there's a different answer. That's not the answer.
Let me ask you one question, and by no means is this to try to start and I told him when he presented it, uh, there was a local seminar that we had. Krista Dutton was a speaker because obviously
Mm-hmm.
she's here locally and she's very good. And
Yeah,
uh,
Chris is
John
awesome.
John Tattersall came down from Atlanta, and Krista spoke before John, and of course she talked a lot about Mike's measurements and his system and things like that. And then when John was speaking and was saying that he has found using the force plates that he has, and he has the dual force plates, and
Mm-hmm.
what do you call them? Maybe medical grade is that right?
Sure.
The
Yeah.
force
Mm-hmm.
plate one. Okay, so John was saying that he has one of his European players who was in his late 40s or maybe early mid 40s, and he wanted to start to prepare for the Champions Tour, but he was playing some Corn Ferry events, and he came back and he was swinging at about 112, 113. He's like, there's no way I can't even compete out there, not with these kids the way they're hitting it today. So they started working on his speed and getting him longer and all these other things. And through the force plates, John said he found out that there was more of a lateral component to it. So of course, being a fan of Mike's work, and I raised my hand, I say, John, I know you know Mike, and how does this relate to the different post systems, in particular for the front post? And John and I said, look, I'm not trying to start Alpha War #2 by any means. I know that people are sick of that. And he said no, that he has had talks with Mike about it. And John's where the discussion was kind of had stopped, where they had to they had to go back home or wherever they had to go, was John's question to Mike was, it's not that I'm denying that there's a post system. It's like, where does it happen? Because there is a lateral component on some of the longer
Right.
hitters. And when he came on the show, we used Rory as the example. Rory does start that movement to the left, and then he pushes off to his right side. Obviously, Rory is a fantastic driver of the ball.
Right.
Um, I guess and you have a system where there's a varying post system. How would the pressure shifting relate to somebody who's going to stay mostly on their lead side?
Yeah. So I think number one, there's confusion about how strict a posting, or I call it swing anchor. So swing anchor is a combination of the upper center and the lower center. All right.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at uh, any particular golfer and you go from their feet through their hip joints and you draw the lines up to where they meet, that triangle could be leaning rearward. It could be more centered or leaning forward. So there are golfers that have more, and let me predicate one more thing. Just because you have a pressure shift doesn't mean like you have a lateral kinematic shift.
Okay.
Okay. So in other words, the centers don't have to both move, laterally. I can stand up and massively, if I can kind of get this for you here, but I could like massively pressure my trail foot. Do you see me massively, shifting rearward kinematically?
Mm-hmm.
No, not necessarily. I demonstrate this in all the educations that we do. So, but there are golfers that when they create that lateral pressure shift, they also create a bigger motion in the lateral motion of the center mass. Okay. And maybe even the upper hub may go with it. There are golfers that are built to do that. And like Fred Couples is going to bump to the right and then counter to the left.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he's what I would call a front anchor golfer. And I've used terms like hitting, swinging, and throwing. Okay. Swinging more around a centered, axis, so to speak. Throwers having more lateral motion because what do throwers do? Shift and turn, shift and turn. So there's other dynamic patterns. So what we're getting into here is the complication of the dynamic patterns. And people trying to be too hard-lined on definitions of how strictly something needs to be if you're anchored or posted. Like in my books, I describe anchoring as a boat anchor. Okay, we drop the anchor, there's the line. If we're just out in the bay somewhere, this boat can actually drift around that anchor
Mm-hmm.
line, and there's a lot of pliability there. So it's not really strict. Now, if I drop 3 anchor lines off that boat, front, back, one on the side somewhere, that thing would pretty much stay right where it was going to be, right? As long as we know where the flow of motion in the water, right? And so when we're looking at these actions, some players actually need to have center mass motion to get them into momentum so that they actually can get the flow of motion they need. They can link up the kinetic chain. They can do everything that they need to. If you look at a pitcher, somebody could throw really hard from a very static position, and somebody else needs more motion to get loaded, kind of in the simple terms, right?
Yep.
And Ben Shear does some work on that relates to this as far as resistors and releasers as well, and understanding so he has a test where you're going to jump as high as you can and reach and kind of hit a mark on the wall, so to speak, right? And he'll test to see, are you better at jumping high from a preloaded squat where you're at a pause and then you jump, or are you somebody that needs to drop down and then jump? Okay. And so this has what I've seen direct correlation to this. Golfers that need that motion. So my wife seems like always to be moving and needing to get into motion to go. Whereas I have a dance in my feet, but the rest of my body doesn't look like it's moving a lot. And I can sort of just get going, so to speak. I'm kind of in the middle, by the way. I believe there's a continuum there. And so I describe it often as like Ben would say, time to gather speed. So if you look at Usain Bolt, at 50 yards, was he leading the pack? I don't know what the exact number was, but early on he wasn't, right? And Gavin was out there leading the pack every time, right? And I guarantee you at whatever your yardage was, 75 yards or whatever, Gavin's like, I hope that mother doesn't blow by me again. And he blew by him every single time, right? So like Usain Bolt needed time to gather speed, right? Gavin was fast out of the blocks, right? If it was a 50-yard dash, everybody know who Gavin is. Nobody would know who Usain Bolt is, right? And so I'm in the middle, and I was a linebacker and a fullback, so obviously I was fast enough, but I was fast and I could hit hard. No wonder why I was a linebacker and a fullback, right? So I could create force, and I was fast enough, but I was never fast enough to be a corner. They tried me at halfback, I think, a couple of times, and then very quickly learned, okay, he's not going to be a good halfback, right? And
the outside linebacker's waiting for you as you're running up to him.
Right, exactly.
Hey, I've been waiting here for a couple seconds.
Yeah.
Just come on.
Hey, my tea is done. You finally arrived. That was me, right? I could fill holes and I could hit hard though. And yeah, so we see that continuum there. So even with this sort of this need to with combined activity with a pressure shift, and how much does the center of mass need to move for that individual to get their dynamics in order. I'm going to just say it that way, because even our dynamics are like a puzzle, right? So I'm sure you've heard the story where Scott Lynn. I tell this a lot. Other people probably heard it on other stuff, but Scott Lynn was talking to Paul Wood. So Scott Lynn's the biomechanist for Swing Cat, right? And
Yeah, I've
Paul
had him
Wood,
on. He was on a couple. I've had them both
yeah,
on
I
the show.
love Scott. Scott's
They're
great.
great guys.
Yeah, Paul's, a scientist for Ping, right? Paul
Hmm.
says this guy, he goes, you work with people. He goes, I don't like working with people. Golf shafts are clean. People are messy.
Yes.
Right? We all laugh about it. Like, yeah, we're all messy, right?
Yep.
So like our dynamics and all the dynamic patterns that go into like, I mean, I've got 12 things I identify structurally as far as what I call your structural design, which is like the basic form of your swing. You know, I've got 25 dynamic patterns I'm looking at, plus, and I mean, the
Hmm.
ones I can't even screen for yet, right? On top of that. So it's like, yeah, it's really messy. So it's like, so what I see with John's stuff is that John and John is seeing very specific things that are helping very specific golfers. And then, of course, when you're good at that, maybe there's other people out there that have struggled with something, and those people talk to the person that you help. A lot of times, you get more of those people to come to you, right? So, like in the
Yep.
80s, everybody was teaching load the right side, turn level. So 80s up until even 90s, Tiger did that even up to almost 2000 maybe, right?
Hmm.
Like a little bit before that, before all of it, certainly to 97, right? And it's maybe around 2000 he started centering things up. But so it's like everybody was taught that. Well, how many front anchor golfers do you think came to me during those time periods? I mean, they're like, oh, you just teach front anchor golf, right? It's like, no, it's just that like if you're a rear anchor golfer, you've got a plethora of instructors you can go see out there right
Hmm.
now, and there aren't very many front anchor people that at the time, right? So I had a lot of center and front anchor golfers coming to me. Funny thing is now you can find a lot of center and front anchor systems out there, right? So it's like whether it's Golf Tech or Stack and Tilt or what have you. And now I got a lot of rear anchor people starting to come to me again, right? And I've been left a center golfer my whole career. My wife is a rear anchor golfer. My dad was more front than me. So it's like I coach all of them. I just want to know what works best for you. But yeah, so you'll start to see this that he probably will start to get more people that fit that mold because those people will be looking for those solutions, and he's got an answer for that.
Hmm.
And there's other things he does that I would say original that I go, ooh, that's really good also. And in my mind I go, who does this fit, right? What golfers are going to be use this, because I'm going to put that in my toolbox for those golfers, right? And so you can have a front anchor golfer that actually needs a lateral shift, okay, to get everything organized from a dynamic standpoint before they counter back into the front anchor. Hogan did the same thing.
Well,
Now,
not to, sorry to
yeah,
interrupt
no,
you,
you're all
but
good. I get on a roll, so anytime.
but I think at the seminar that was one of John's points to Mike, and Bryson DeChambeau, he uses the example. He said, "Look, in Mike's system, Bryson's a front anchor, front post in Mike's program." He
Right,
said, "But if you look at his numbers in Chris's, in his living room on the force plate, he gets into that right side, and John said his question to Mike was, when does it become one of the posts? In other words, there is all these components are happening: the lateral, the vertical, and the torque." He
right,
said, "So when are you classifying it as that?" I think was kind of the last I heard of
yeah.
where it was left off.
So what I do is I was the first one to put the triangle overlays on swing sequences, and
Hmm.
so I think you've seen them in the original book. So
Yes.
if you start off with a front anchor lean, okay, I'm doing it in my view in the camera. You got the mirror image?
Yeah, you can see it. You're right in the middle.
So I'm going to front anchor, right? Now, if I create a lateral shift like Freddie Couples, right? If I create a
Hmm.
lateral shift, and this never gets to truly asymmetrical center or rear, right? So I just reduce the amount of forward lean I had in that triangle, and then I transition back into more forward lean. I'm on the front anchor side of the continuum. It's a
Makes
floating
sense.
front anchor system, is how I've written about it. Okay, and even center anchor again. There's some window in there, right? So we're
Hmm.
looking at what exactly are the percentages, and I've said this a lot of ways with people over time because I'm not doing the math on it. My dad and my stepdad could do the math in their head. My stepdad was our top physicist in the United States. So like when I had questions, they could do the math and they could tell me when I was wrong, when I was right, and if I was right, don't let anybody tell you you're wrong because here's the math on it,
Hmm.
sort of thing. So I was very fortunate to have that stuff, growing up. But rear anchor golfers, it's like, as a matter of fact, oh, you can't be a rear anchor golfer anymore. And then I just saw this, Instagram thing of Anthony Kim from Face On. Do you think he's got a rear anchor, rear lean
Yeah,
pattern going?
that's blatantly obvious
It
that
was
he's.
blatantly obvious, right? And people say that he's been striping it and winning in money games and stuff. So, and hey, that was valid before. It could still be valid today. Like, understanding what matchups go along with that is really important. One of the early things I read, just another thing popped in my head. Claude Harmon at one point said, "You can be an open faced player or a closed faced player." He says they both work. You just got to know how everything matches up.
Hmm.
So that was like the first time I heard that. I did not actually coin the matchup phrase. I mean, I actually stole that from Claude Harmon, is everything has to match up to that, that idea. I don't remember his exact words, but I'm telling you that my idea of matchup came from him saying that. Okay.
And
So,
and I hope in the world of linguistics or semantics that somebody out there doesn't say, well, on Golf 360, EA said this and Pete said that, and they try to create this argument. I am a big fan, and I know you are too, of Mike and as well as John, and I think
oh,
they
yeah,
both do great things.
absolutely.
I think it's getting into the very, very, very small things or the specific application to individuals.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
and I think that the work they're doing is pushing it to say, hey, we got another way to measure. Now we can even determine to a greater extent who should do what. And I think
yeah,
both of them
and
are doing phenomenal work.
I think that also people need to realize there's a difference between scientific research that proves something's valid, and when it proves something valid, it doesn't disprove that something else isn't valid.
Hmm.
I think that's one thing we need to understand. Another thing we need to understand is that we are all we all have personalities and are all characters. We have character, but we're all characters in our own right as well. And because of the way we've organized things, we have preferences. We prefer to start somewhere. Like I've always said that there are good starting points. It's not an absolute, it's a good starting point, right? So like taking the grip, for example, do you match the trail hand to the trail arm action? Or do you start from some other convention that's valid also, like get the trail hand square to the club face and get the lead arm where it hangs? They're both good places to start. I've started at both places. And so, the idea then becomes, are we willing to adjust once we realize that for the individual in front of us, this thing isn't working, right?
Hmm.
And when you're trying to convey information, this is another thing, you have to make choices. So like when Mike and I were, doing bioswing dynamics together, we had to make a choice about what are we going to agree upon so that we can actually present this to people. And this is a starting point. It's not an absolute, it's a starting point. Because people can't, I mean, our educations were like the fire hose treatment, people would say a lot, right? I mean, a lot of information dumped on you in a very short period of time. But even at that, we were trying to actually at least create concepts that were different from the conventions that we know are valid and that have been proven. And they just have a starting point, right? So, like with what Mike and Terry are doing, they've just chosen their preferences to have a different starting point, okay? And then my preferences have been to have my starting points, right? And I'm
Hmm.
okay with everybody's. I'm like, okay, I can start there and I can go down that road with you. But there's also, this is another valid way of doing it. And I could start here and we can run down that pattern, and that's why I kind of bring up the golfing machine thing. It's like they're all starting somewhere and they're all using the golfing machine information. And you can get as deep into it as you want or as, simplified as much as you want. So some people choose more to have a more simple starting point and then they go from there. And certainly in their coaching, if they realize that somebody's supposedly an outlier the way that the preferences have been described, that they would adjust. I mean, I know Mike does that for certain. I've spent many a time with him watching him in person coach people. So it's like he's not as rigid as like the information may make it sound at times. And then the one other perspective from this is that there's this sort of concept now in, I think, the golf world that it needs to be proven scientifically. And if it's not proven scientifically, we can't talk about it, sort of thing.
Mm.
And it's just out there. And I'm like, well, wait a second, because what really do you mean by proven scientifically? Because
That's the same question I asked him.
yeah, I've written this a bunch of times. The scientific method starts with observation and recognizing patterns and differences and stuff like that. So I can do a lot of that before I get to the measuring point, right? And then even once I do the measuring of stuff, what am I measuring? I'm only measuring the subject that is in front of me or the set of subjects that are in front of me. And
Hmm.
that may not be indicative of the population, right? So, for example, in the pro model, Fred Griffith and Dr. Mann, right, did the pro model book, if you remember that, and the study on that. And they did 300 and something, I think, tour professionals. So within the model, there were only, I think, three front anchor golfers, if I remember properly or correctly, and the rest of them were either center anchor or rear anchor golfers.
Hmm.
So the suggested ideal was right of center.
Hmm.
Makes kind of sense if
Yeah,
they
it's like a
were right.
median of the subject group.
Yeah, exactly. So if we looked at that study based upon that group of subjects, that information was very valid. But can we actually say that it was valid for the population? Well, we know now that's not the case because how many great front anchor golfers have there been and are there, right?
Hmm.
And so the way the studies are done becomes really important. If there are influences and attributes that are going into the measurements that you're gathering, but you don't know how they're influencing things, then it can kind of skew the data points at times. So that's why I'm really concerned with what did it really prove? What does the study prove? What is it proving is valid? It's not necessarily eliminating something else. So when there's concrete, evidence, in the world that there are other valid options other than what that particular study shows, then we have to say, okay, that showed that that's very valid and we can learn more about the validity of that pattern and how that works or those options. But we don't want to take the step and say that that is proving that this is not the case.
Hmm.
And I think that we haven't clarified that enough in the research industry in golf right now. And look, the guys that do the research get it. Because if you sit down, I've talked to Phil Cheatham and like Scott Land, like a lot of these guys, and when I've talked to them in person and I raise one of these questions, they immediately say, "Oh yeah, no, the data didn't say that." Somebody can make a conclusion about the
Yeah,
data.
it gets very, very misinterpreted as it gets out from what they're doing to the next level of high level coaches, and then it's usually from there to the coaches is where it gets distorted.
That's
Is
right.
what I found.
That's right. And again, you can't learn everything at once. So you're trying to present information in a way that they are building blocks that people can continue to build on and they can truly understand the full spectrum of the messiness of human golf swings, right? But and that's where I think we need to be more careful going forward. Look, and I did this myself in my early books. I've written 28 books. As I was writing early books, I would kind of describe something as almost being absolute because that's the way I saw it. And then I realized, you know what, this is just a trend or a tendency. It's
Hmm.
not absolute at all. If I could find outliers, I got to say it's a tendency. And then I started thinking, well, why is that a tendency? Like, okay, let's look at how athletes become athletes. Let's look at how, conventions have influenced the athlete. Let's look how the environment influenced the athlete. And I started looking at all these influences that went into creating that tendency that we see. And so it's just like, for example, if you think of swinging left, swinging right, and swinging straight, like there's no real reason why, like when I look at, I can identify what you do, but why did you become that? I don't know. All I
Yeah,
know is
yeah.
I can
Yeah,
say
you can
why.
only figure out yeah, you can only figure out what you can measure, and
Yeah.
as you've said it a
So
number of times, there's certain things that we can't measure yet.
yeah, exactly. A lot of things we can't measure simultaneous, because of technology. So anyway, I'm an under golfer, but I'm an under golfer that swings left, and Scott McCarron's an under golfer that swings left, and I'm like, well, why is it that he's an under golfer that swings left, and I'm an under golfer that swings left, but Zach Johnson's an under golfer that swings right? So what made the difference there? And when we start to look at the hand and where the hand is on the club, the more, the hand gets underneath the shaft, the more to the right you tend to swing.
Hmm.
And the more the hand gets on top, the more the left you tend to swing. And the reason is the swing's going to want to tend to go in the direction the palm is facing as the palm, is moving through the ball. And so, oh, Then we start looking at what's my neutral, like what's a neutral grip, right? But what's my neutral? So then, like with Doc Wright stuff, he's got power angle, things that he works with, and start looking at, okay, well, what would my power angle be in his system? And I look at that. Okay, I go, well, that sort of matches my under, trail arm alignment,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not where my neutral is. I figured out where my neutral is. My neutral, is somewhere in between my trail arm action, and where that power angle is. That's like where my neutral is. But my grip I grew up with, a conventional, neutral grip, is actually on top of my neutral, if you can follow me on that. So if my let's say my neutral's supposed to be here, but I grip it here. Can you see how that's on top of where my neutral would be?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if your trail arm action or grip is on top of where your neutral is, and you're using your trail arm a lot in delivery, okay, then you're going to go left of where you
Left.
otherwise would have
Yes.
done. And if your trail arm grip is more underneath where your neutral is, okay, then you're going to move a path more to the right. And so, I mean, I've done a lot of research on this. I have videos. I post a lot of videos unlisted on YouTube, so I can just feed them out to people when I have. But I've done that. I did stuff on this years ago, and it's very clear. You can actually see it. I do it with students in the simulator all the time, and see what happens to their patterns. And I've got on top golfers that hook the ball, that if you actually give them an on top grip and you actually get them to learn to swing more right, get the palm facing more right with that on top grip, all of a sudden they don't hook it anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and they play a lot better. So it's like, understanding again all the valid options is the key here. How do we make sure that we understand all the valid options, and then we start to get research explaining why it's valid.
That was why I had that Twitter post. I think it was right before or after we connected for you to come on that I was back and forth with somebody, not arguing, but it was basically to the point. Instead of arguing certain things in the swing as far as the mechanics of the swing, why don't golf coaches dedicate maybe a greater percentage of their time from zero, which is not going to be very hard. I mean, let's say you siphon off 10 to maybe 20% of a coach's time to having a better understanding of why somebody should fit into what you're prescribing to them, that the student would improve better and the coaching would get much better if that understanding was uh, to a greater degree. And
Yeah,
that's kind of where that discussion ended. But that certain person likes to uh, talk about what he teaches. But my point was, well, I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong, and I'm not saying what your adversary is doing is wrong. What I'm saying is, let's determine which of you two applies to a certain individual, because
right.
obviously some of it's working for your students and some of theirs is working for their students. So you're both doing something right. Let's figure out
Yeah,
why.
like one time I had that question, like do the math on it, and it came out to something like, if you teach one specific method, it will ideally fit at best a 3% of the population, at best.
Mm.
Like that was the at best number, okay, and even like down to point something percent, they were arguing it would really fit, okay. But we're messy and there's some room for leeway, so okay, we're gonna, they bumped it up to like 3%, and it's like, so yeah, so it's like right off the bat, if you think, hey, front anchor, center anchor, rear anchor, and if you're making everybody do just one version, 66% of the population, let's say, if it was equally distributed, just for argument's sake, would be at a disadvantage going to you, right? And so that's why having these options is really important. And the feedback I get from students, which is really cool, is that every time I identify something, through a screening process or just through a evidence-based process, and go, okay, this is how you're built to do it, they always give me analogies of, oh, you know what? When I played my best golf, I was doing this sort of thing, right? It's like, I was working with just Keith Reifert. Just lost his name. Reifers.
Kyle
Kyle
Rifles.
Reifers. Yeah,
Yes.
man, having a senior moment here. And so we're on the range, and obviously he's a swing right golfer, and we start out with like 8 iron or whatever, and He's doing everything really good, and they're just dropping back towards the zero line. As the clubs get longer, his path is less right. They're drawing less. He gets to 3-wood, they go pretty straight. And he gets his driver, and we still have a little bit of a positive path line set up. And every shot is just dropping off to the right. He can't work the ball back to the zero line. He's like, man, I just can't draw this driver back to the zero line. And I thought to myself, you know what? That's 10 balls in a row that were awesome. I go, why don't we just play that? Why don't we just turn the system and play it? And
Mm-hmm.
after 2 or 3 of those, he goes, you know what? This is how I played my best golf at Ohio State. I actually drew everything except for my driver, and my driver aimed down the left side and cut it back into play. So interesting how he had that, right? And like, Stan Utley's a good friend of mine, and I was fortunate a student of mine wanted me to go learn his system because he had taken short game and putting lessons from him. And then, so when he was, where I was instead of where Stan was, I could still help him, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
went to go see Stan twice, and after the second time, we're out on the golf course, and he started asking me about his swing. Okay, well, the things I do with screening and all that. So I would screen him and say, you're a front anchor golfer. Oh, I remember I played this tournament, really focused on staying on that front side, and I played really good in that tournament. And I'm like, yeah, you're a side cover golfer. Just think about it in your putting and everything. And your right arm needs to extend down through the ball like this. You need to stand up more through the ball. You know what? I did that in this tournament in Memphis. Like every time I screened him, he had a story about it. And at the end, I went, so have you ever thought of writing down all those things that you did well that helped you win tournaments and then put them all into one package? He goes, I've never thought about that.
To give it deep thought, even though it seems like obvious.
Yeah, exactly. But that's how I did it. I was an incessant note taker because I never had a golf coach teach me golf swing. I did it all on my own. But I was an incessant note taker, and I would like write things down. And like you had that day, right? This is it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hogan brought this up, right? This is it. And the next day, it's not there,
It's
so it
gone.
wasn't it, right? How often have we all been down that road, right?
Oh,
But then
many times.
what I noticed is the things that kept reoccurring, like, hey, I wrote that thing down again. Hey, I wrote that thing down again. The things that reoccurred were the things that needed to go into that full package for me, and that's how I ended up developing, my swing for myself. And so, yeah, so there's we when we start to understand the individual and what works for the individual, they actually are going to buy more into it because I guarantee you they're going to have experiences where they say, you know what? I've done that before and it really worked. And then I went to this teacher, or I read this article, or I saw this video on YouTube and I tried something else and it messed me up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of times when I come home from giving lessons, my girlfriend will say, "Tell me what you did with somebody or how'd it go and this and that," and we'll get. And so I just did this, and they start hitting it good. She goes, "All you did was one or two." Yeah, that was it. Why? Well, that's all they needed. And I say, so I'm doing a long time. I'm 52 this year. I said I'm either getting very, very good, and so because constantly, I mean, that's how number one, it's how I find other guests for the show. And then when I have to understand what their system is or what they do, so I have to study them. So for me, it's been far superior to any PGA educational program.
Right. Yeah.
And so
Yep.
I learned all these things, and I said, well, I took what so-and-so said, and I took it, and this is in my head, and here's how it might apply, and here's how I might have twisted it based off what I think the student, and I say, do this, and it's not going to work yet, and here's how you're going to hit it, and they'll hit it like, and I'll say, we're going to tweak something else, and they get used to it, and then we tweak it, and then they start hitting it good. Or I might even say, because I do have a background in club fitting. I worked for a guy that was, he might punch me for saying this because he's retired, but I call him the nerd in the basement. I mean, some of those guys are so unbelievably smart that they're so great at what they do that they have no marketing, and they don't care to market. They don't want to get his pulse set. I don't like people. I'm an engineer. Shafts are clean, club heads are clean, grips are clean.
Right.
As far as dealing with it, it gets very messy. But I'll tell somebody, you hit the ball good off the tee, you can't hit off the fairway. Yeah, your irons in particular. Yeah, well, it makes sense because your irons are 3/4 inch too short.
Right.
If they're too long, I can have them grip down, and then they start to hit it
Right.
good. And some of my friends don't believe me in that, and then I say, okay, here's your hybrid. Here's where it should be. Grip it to here, and some of them, the first swing, they will hit, and they're like, I hate you.
Right. Yeah. Well, and
But
it's interesting how
you learn
like
these things.
misfitted clubs are and how they're made. I think that a lot of people don't understand from an industry standpoint. Really customizing clubs to fit people mean that you have to have the same heads and all these different weights, and then it becomes
Mm-hmm.
like logistically, how do we manufacture those and not have waste at the end and all this sort of stuff, right? So I mean, it's very, very complicated. So they try to keep it as simplified as possible, so they have less SKU numbers and all that, in the warehouse, right? And but in reality, the story's pretty simple. If you look at two golfers, one is 6'5", one's 5'9". All their proportions from joint to joint throughout their whole body is identical. So proportionately, except for their height, they are the same golfer.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say they have the same dynamic patterns, okay? Because actually you could have structurally the same golfers and they could be different dynamically, and then that makes it more messy. Well, let's just
Yep.
assume that they're the same dynamic pattern. At address, all their angles would be identical. The angle of the shaft to the ground would be identical. But the 6'5" guy, his angle from the shaft to the ground is pointing through the same part of his body, is going to be a lot higher off the ground, even though it's at the same angle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that length has got to be a lot longer to get to the ground. It's the one biomechanical thing that no system out there actually adjusts for. That's how I actually fit people. So every season I make sure I've got, a standard half-inch over, inch and a half over, and 2-inch over, demo clubs from companies so that I can fit people. And even if it's not the company they're going to end up playing, I can get them into a length and a lie that goes, oh man, that's so much easier for me. Great, we got that figured out. Now let's figure out what company do you want, what club model do you want, what shaft is going to work best at this length for you, all that sort of stuff. But it's so important to do that, and that's the number one thing that I don't think they do enough of. Now, they didn't carry light enough shafts, in the past to be good at that. Now we're seeing most of these companies will make up to 2.5 inches over. 2 inches
Mm-hmm.
over, just because we've got C taper lights and and all these light versions of shafts.
Graphite. The graphite is the
And
material and load value on a graphite shaft. When you and I were growing up, G
yeah,
Loomis was the graphite. You couldn't take a half a swing because the shaft wouldn't load. But
right.
now, I mean, in the last 5 to 10 years, the
Yeah, there's
industry has
so
come
much
so
better.
far.
Yeah, and
I
even that,
actually made the switch.
there's a feel component there that people aren't used to, that they got to
Mm-hmm.
transition over to. But it's really the solution for the fit for so many people now, isn't it? To get it there. And like, of course, when these shafts first started being made lighter, everything ballooned, right?
Mm-hmm.
So literally, I just had to put a set together for a gentleman, 1.75 inches over length, C taper light shafts, hard stepped, to help bring that trajectory down, right? It's funny, like the head of the tour department for Cleveland at the time, Strixon Cleveland now, asked me one time when dynamic gold lights came out, and I always played X100s,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, well, I want to try the dynamic gold lights, but I want you to take them and hard step them. He's like, well, what are you trying to accomplish here, right? And I'm like, well, I want to keep the same trajectory and everything I have, as much as possible, but I want to go to a lighter shaft. There wasn't any other option. The C taper, the dynamical light launched it higher than the dynamic gold.
Mm-hmm.
But if I could take them and hard step them, then I could bring it down a little bit. It was sort of the best thing. Of course, in the future, we're going to see this where they're going to have lighter shafts that launch it as low, like the C taper light launching it as low as a C taper shaft. There'll be that option someday.
Yes.
Because the industry's just going to see that it's needed. As a matter of fact, it's more necessary for these guys that need longer shafts and lighter shafts than it is for the people using the heavier shafts. It's even more important for them.
When I missed it last year, I went to Q School. It was 2006, and putting was my Achilles heel. And I told this story a couple of times in here. Hopefully, people listen again don't get bored. But my last year playing, I was averaging, this is no joke, about 6 lip outs per round. And guys would come up in the first tee, and we do the introductions, and they'd say, "I heard the rumors. There's no way it can be true." When we were done, they would say, "If I didn't see it, I wouldn't believe it."
Right.
You're missing the cut, or you're barely making the cut, and you're lipping out on average that many times. It gets very frustrating.
Yeah.
Because the ball striking was there. I mean, I hit it way more than I needed to. And I just went into this. I said, I'm going to figure this out. It held me back, and I got to figure this out. And that kind of led me to running into Jeff Mangum, and just of all the mad scientists out there, just about the most mad. But for some crazy reason, he and I get along pretty well. At least I think so. Hopefully, he would think so as well. But it was so interesting what I found out in some of that study. was, as we talk about ratios, was the ratio of the leg length, and I would measure to the top of the iliac crest because it was an easier point to get to.
Right.
But I found out if that, and then from there up to the top of the shoulder, or the center of the shoulder joint, as close as I could get. Like when we were in junior high and someone punches you right between
Right.
in that shoulder joint, and you can't feel your arm for about 15 minutes.
Right.
So I was I was getting closer to 3 to 1. So, or I'm sorry, closer to 2 to 1. Where my brother, who's 3 or 4 inches shorter than me, uh, his legs constituted a longer portion of his overall height than his torso did. So my brother, in what I created, would have to he would need a longer putter because he doesn't have as much body bending over, so
Right.
that his legs are pushing, making the putter longer. Me, I would have a shorter and flatter putter than my brother, even though he's 4 inches shorter. And people are
Right.
like, that doesn't make any sense. I was like, I explained the ratios to him. I'm like, and they start to have an understanding of, you don't just fit by height or by gender. You fit
Right.
by, as you mentioned, the ratios of the arm structure and the body and the legs and everything, and then the angle of the shaft, and all these things come into play. And then they say, "Wow, I didn't realize it was that much." Say, yeah, neither did I until a number of years ago.
Yeah.
But
And if you set that posture first,
yes,
and
that's what I
then
would
you
do.
can measure what the club needs to be. And
Hmm.
that's the key. I always get them to learn to set the posture first. So then you don't have to know all the variables again. Again, if you know the story of all the influences and you
Hmm.
realize that set the posture, well, all those influences are now in play. Now there's just this measurement here that needs to be done.
Do you remember a couple years ago in putting, is a lot of the theory revolved around keeping the shaft in the same plane as the forearm?
Yeah.
That
Mm-hmm.
that had become very big. So when I was studying this, I had found out that the carrying angle of most men's forearms in particular, because men's arms would be more vertically. So from the elbow to the hand, it would hang more vertical than a women. And the chauvinistic explanation, is, as it was so aptly described to me, was women, from generations of carrying kids or bundles of wood and things like that, their forearms went out at a bigger angle. So the men's were more vertical, but what I found out was the vast majority of the population would measured between 73 to 76 degrees, or 14 degrees off of vertical.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, as you talked about absolutes earlier, and I'm thinking, because I was fitting people very upright. I'm thinking, well, that this is what anatomy and this is what science say, but why is it not holding true for majority of the PGA Tour? Why are they? And then Jeff was the one that explained to me vertical torque and how you hold the club in your hand, and if you have a flatter one, you're going to have to hold it more firmly, particularly in the lead hand, so that that putter doesn't want to fall and arc too much to the inside too soon, which is going to cause some problems later on. But that was a very interesting thing, and why I fully understand as you described earlier, the difference between when you wrote your books. Here's what data we have, and here's what I'm seeing, but it doesn't apply across the spectrum.
Right. Yeah.
Even if it might be in a quote unquote science.
Right. Yeah.
So
I mean,
that was quite eye opening.
yeah, it really is, and it's like, I think there's some other variables that go in there. Again, when you see like how much forward bend is there in the pelvis, and then how much
Hmm.
rounding is there in the shoulders, so those things would then influence why the fit got flatter, right? And anytime something goes more this way or more this way, and the arms come more in,
Hmm.
then you're going to have a flatter angle than you otherwise would, right? And
Yes.
actually, I patented the very first putting training aid for a planing stroke, and it's called the Sure Stroke. We made 25,000 units, I think, in the beginning, sold them all out. We were making them in Asia. The bubble bursted there, and I've just made them for students by hand. Haven't really marketed it. I am going to start marketing it again this year, but it actually gets you set up where it's on the same plane, and so you know often we'll have students whose hands are too low in the initial fit, and then when I put the training aid in and they set up to it, their hands are way higher and their posture has to change to accommodate it, and they think it's like really different. But it's amazing how beginners and stuff right off the bat, they really actually start to improve dramatically. I mean, I just fit students with them and I say, now go putt with it. And I ask them a month later how they do, and they're like, it's incredible. It's so much more solid than it's ever been. And my start lines are great, and all
Yes,
that
in
stuff.
particular when you get the hands raised, because the fingers hang vertically naturally, and then the lifeline goes up the forearm,
Right.
and people don't really understand it. And if they hold a conventional putter too long, they're going to start to deviate those wrist angles, and now the putter's going to gate just off of pure
Right.
physics,
Yeah.
and they have a
Yeah, and the
very
more you
difficult
get
time.
it deeper into the fingers, the more it's going to happen, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
So, and again, some people need to be a little bit less in the palm line, like Tiger. Tiger's shaft doesn't perfectly match his forearms. It's kind of on the low
Hmm.
side of his forearms, and some people are more through the middle. Some people a little bit higher, Steve Stricker, sort of thing. So there's a
Yep.
window there again. Again, there's always these windows. I just like the anchor, it floats, so you can have this lateral motion. And again, I think that's why posting to kind of circle back around to that. I think people think of post as this rigid post, and it's
Hmm.
like the term I think invokes that. And I use swing anchor for a reason and describe the anchor as having this pliability, right? Because there's these windows of dynamic activity. And I think that's true here too. Like when we're talking about a more planing stroke, what's the window of pliability how perfectly does it need to match the forearms, so to speak. And you'll have some people where it matches the lead form more than the trail form, and some people
Hmm.
where it matches both forearms. So there's different ways of going about that. But we need to understand that there's these windows that we're of acceptability, you might say, and as long as we're within that window of acceptability, our students are going to keep learning and improving. And like you mentioned, that you gave your students one or two things. That's all I want them to do. Take one or two things, three at most away, if they can handle it. Meaning, I'm going to work on these first two, and I'm not going to see you for a month. So
Hmm.
most likely, I'm going to be there before I see you next. So I got the next thing I can add in. It's about as far down the line as we can get somebody, right? And
You
I
know
mean, I
what's
had students tell me, I can handle seven things. I'm like, I'm sorry, you can't. And then, and I'll prove it to you, right? In their mind, they can, meaning from a conceptual standpoint, but from a real educational learning standpoint, they're not able to handle that many things.
can't
So,
process.
so when you're trying to improve people, like you're taking them, their ball flight goes like this. You bring their ball flight to this. You're bringing it in. Every time you're doing something like that, you're doing one or two things to improve it, and they're going to get where they need to get over time. And as long as they're patient, they understand that they can be improving along the way. You don't necessarily have to get worse before you get better. I think that's the case when people's habits are just so bad and you need to change two things. I mean, to improve ball flight, two things need to change, not just one, right? Typically. And so it's like, and their habits are so bad that they try to change one thing, but their subconscious mind keeps overriding the second thing with the old habit.
Yeah, it's just very
That's where
ingrained.
that's where the I got to get worse before I get better thing. No, you're not getting worse. You're getting better at doing that one thing, but this other thing just doesn't match up with it. So the outcome seems to be worse until you've got that ingrained and you can match two things up. And whenever you're matching two good things up, two good adjustments up, you're doing better.
Yeah, I don't think they understand. I think that because it's changing over, and I think where they think they're getting worse is they're not able to plan for a shot.
Yeah.
So the better shot is happening. They just have that diversion back to what the comfort zone is, that old patterning, and they're not sure when each one's going to show up, and for them it becomes more frustrating. It's like, yeah, but you're
Yeah.
still improving.
And sometimes it's just a matter of trust. Like, so we had discussed before we got on air, some of our health issues. I had mercury poisoning. I ballooned up to 225 pounds, and I'm a tilter. But when I was at that, and I actually ended up getting a hernia. And when I was in those conditions, I couldn't tilt the way I had to turn horizontal, even though it wasn't the best thing for me. But it was the best way I could just functionally get it around the golf course. And now I've been losing weight and getting better and getting stronger, and I can tilt the way I used to. So this last season, I've been working on getting all my tilts where they need to be, and the ball keeps going further, and things keep getting better. And then I was in a really good place and playing really good, and then all of a sudden, I would just keep doing what I was doing, so my tilts were getting better. All of a sudden, I get these pushes, and they look like pushes to me because I'm a swing left golfer, but I was swinging too far left for my ideal. So
Hmm.
now when I swing the proper amount of left, it looks like a push to me, but it's really not. And even my friends noticed when I did that, like the ball went further. It's like to the right, but it's further. And then I would try to aim it, but I just couldn't trust it, right? Like my mind would like, no,
Wouldn't
you're
make
aiming
the
down the
same
left
swing.
side. You're not aiming down the right center, sort of thing. Because I've been aiming down the right center and playing a nice pull power fade down the left center, right? And now all of a sudden I aim down the right center and starts down the right center and it goes right, and it looks like a push to me. And it's like, well, why can't you just align the thing? And it's been like this for everyone I've ever worked with. Until your subconscious mind accepts it, you can't just align it. Because you're looking in a different direction, and your mind doesn't want to do the same thing. And how often I look there and I just stripe it right there now, right?
Yes.
Sort of thing. And I played with a friend yesterday, and we got to 18, and there's water all the way down the left side. It's a par five.
Even worse.
It's cold. I missed the short birdie putt I had to go birdie or two under in the last two holes to shoot in the 60s. And so now I'm standing up there. It's cold. There's water down the left side. And I'm like, you just got to trust this. And I just really had this talking to my subconscious mind and got it to accept it. And I just blitzed it perfectly. And my friend was like, that was just amazing. You just told yourself you got to trust it. And you trusted it, because it'd been coming and going throughout the day. And then I got up there and I knocked it in the greenside bunker, but I didn't make my eagle. So, disappointment, but still a lot of fun, especially working on those things and getting that feel of trust again. Something has improved, and it just improved inadvertently. Like, I wasn't planning on that showing up. I was pretty happy where things were. But the better I made my side bend, the better I got my hands linked more in front of me. I'm what I call a center linkage golfer that gets the shaft more forward, the less left I swing. And it becomes more ideal. And boy, and everything, the line of flight and everything is just so much better when I do it, that it's like, all right, I got to get used to what that looks like and what that feels like, so I can just align this to aim this new variation of what's going on. And it takes trust to do that.
When I realized just by trial and error that I needed more tilts in my swing, because I was the lateral, and I think that it contributed to the irritation of back that actually drove me off of playing. Just through some of the tests that you guys have in doing those, and it was interesting that the back side right above, where the rib cage is, about the thoracic spine.
Mm-hmm.
I was getting sore there after hitting balls. I'm like, well, I guess it's better sore there than in my low back. But I'm like, this is interesting. I got to be tilting better, because those areas are getting stretched and then are using. It was very interesting.
Yeah, and exactly. It's interesting how somebody that's built to be a more horizontal golfer goes too much on the tilting. So that middle line, there's a window for them that they need to be in. And as soon as you leave that window, that's when you actually invite injury. So, let's say Adam Scott, and you were over here on the horizontal side of the spectrum, and you're getting back problems. And you move into the tilting side of the spectrum, and the back problems go away, or you don't aggravate it anymore. Obviously, they exist, so we got to deal with that, right? So you take somebody like Zalatoris, who's tilting too much, and he's built to be more horizontal, and he gets back problem from tilting too much. But you take somebody who's built to be, a tilter, and you make them go more horizontal, and they get back problems. Like, it goes both ways. Like, it's very simple. Your anatomy is built a certain way. So here's my theory on this tilting and horizontals, by the way. It hasn't been proven yet, but I've talked to a lot of orthopedic surgeons and doctors and stuff, and physiologists. I mean, people that are specialists in the anatomy. And when your ligaments and your tendons go into their insertion points, some people's go in more diagonally, some people's go in more horizontally or perpendicular. And I literally asked my orthopedic surgeon to check when he operated on me, and mine go in more diagonally. And I'm a tilter. I'm a diagonal person, interestingly enough. And he said he does see this and differences in people now that he operates. He never looked for it before I mentioned that, but I haven't seen him in years. But the years I did see him after that, he says that he does see these differences in people.
Does that go all the way into the grip? Because I watched that video on your website where you tossed the club to that guy, and he caught it.
I don't believe the universe is going to make you dramatically different in one joint area than it is in another joint area. In other words, I think the universe organizes you to have this throughout your whole body. And so you'll find that once you understand where you need to be along the continuum of tilts and horizontals, and you manage your pivot action along with your grip, along with other things, to fit in that, things get a lot easier for you. Literally for me, if I stand up and I try to turn horizontal, like even right now, if I just, sitting here, turn this as much as I can, That's as far as I go. If I add tilts in,
Hmm.
you can see how much further I can go. Okay. And so even I had to get my elbow past my leg there, but it's like I can turn further when I add tilts in. And so, there are other things that may influence this. Like if you look at Doc Wright's stuff on core engagement and having the proper core engagement, and that influences range of motion as well. But specifically, if I go horizontal, I get stuck. My joint gets stuck, and I start to feel pain if I try to push those limits
Push
to
it. Yeah, you
where
can't
we're
push it. You're gonna
supposed to
hurt yourself.
be. And I go tilting, and I get there easily. I don't have to worry about it. So I specifically see this in golfers that when you're doing it the opposite of what you're supposed to do, your joints get stuck. And so I actually call it, stuck 3.0. And so, stuck 1.0 is the Tiger Woods fire the body, leave the arms behind, get underplaying, all that stuff, right? So that's stuck 1.0. There's a stuck 2.0. People, you got to get your left arm stuck on your chest and you got to keep it there. And how many of these guys end up looking like this?
Hmm.
Fire the body. This is stuck on your body. I call it the lead arm stuck in front of your body. They never get the arm to go around their body. Okay. And I've
Rocco
worked
just
with
was talking
Mike.
about that.
Yeah, I work
Rocco
with
Media when he
Mike
played really
Small a
well.
ton, and he's one of those guys. He was taught to get it pinned on his chest, and he's stuck 2.0. He's got to get that arm working around his body a lot more.
Hmm.
And then stuck 3.0 is your joints are stuck. Your joints are stuck because you're in the wrong part of the continuum when it comes to horizontals and tilts. And so, as a coach, a student will say, "Hey, I'm stuck." And you'll look at him and you go, "Well, he's not stuck 1.0." You don't say 1.0, but you go, he's not stuck in the way we normally think of stuck. So what does he mean he's stuck?
Hmm.
And so golfers kept saying that. And I realized all these golfers that were out racing their arms were trying to keep this stuck on their pinned on their body. And they kept the lead arm stuck in front of their body and they never released that arm around. Well, therefore, they can never get their arms in front of their body. That only works for a rear linkage golfer. David Duval or somebody that can get it there and rotate and they can get the whole right side through, everything connected. Jim Furyk, great. But if you're a center linkage golfer, Tiger, I got to get my arms in front. My hips have got to feel like they wait for my arms to get in front.
Hmm.
Tiger does not keep this pinned on his body. That sucker, he's creating more and more space as he goes. So yeah, so that's the third, what I would call stuck 3.0 is your joints being stuck.
Yeah, Tiger always talks about owning or wanting to own his swing. I don't know if he's ever gotten there, but you seem to have found a big portion of the map of allowing people to identify things that they could own their swing. And I know on before your other website got all mangled up and you got the new ones, and I'll have those in the summary so people can click on those. If we can touch on Tiger just a little bit, I know some people get a little nervous about that, but I mean, given the injuries he's had going prior to the accidents, in some of the things you had on your website, you didn't believe that he was swinging his swing or something that he could
Yeah,
own, that he was doing some compensation.
yeah.
Where did you see that some things that he was off with that he could have been doing better?
So I wrote a chapter, and so the very first secrets of owning your swing book, Power Three Golf Revolution. I have a chapter with Tiger about his swing, and so the actually it's another senior moment. Was it the first one or the second one? Anyway, in one of them I have a chapter of him in there, and I'm describing how actually the only swing he made prior to like leaving Harmon
Hmm.
that because the first book I was writing those between 2000 and 2008, and then I think 2008 we actually got the copyright on the initial book, but I was actually printing them myself before that, just and giving them to people. And so anyway, the only swing he did that I felt fit his biomechanical pattern perfectly was his stinger shot. And if you look at especially the year 2000, most of the time he was playing a stinger off the tee.
Hmm.
And most of the time it was an iron or a 3-wood. It wasn't the driver as much. He even said at one point that the younger guys are starting to bomb it by him. He felt like he lost distance. And so the things that he was doing at that point in time, there are some certain things he did adjustments he made with his swing with Harmon that I believe were tailored to getting him to be more accurate, because he tended to kind of lose control of the driver a bit, which he has pretty much, he did with everybody, right, that he worked with. So that those things actually got him to lose speed. That's my opinion. But he gained a lot of accuracy, and he had the stinger shot. And let's face it, being the best iron player on the planet for over a decade is going to give you a huge advantage over the field. And having the putting that he had and the short game he had, he could actually afford to spray his driver a little bit and actually still be, he
can make up for it.
Exactly, in a lot of areas. So I describe in the book that I feel like the closest swing that he had to his fitting his biomechanical pattern the best was up until 97 when he won 97 he won the Masters?
97 he won the first one.
Yeah, won the first Masters. And so, I think that actually that swing he had then coming out of college and winning, over that first year or whatever it was the closest he had to his body mechanics. I would have only adjusted a couple of things. And so when he actually was moving rear anchor and having to move back into the ball, and he did that primarily with the longer clubs, right? And mostly with his driver was the reason
they
why
put the camera on his head. Remember, they had the camera on his hat, and it showed how much he moved laterally. Yeah,
and that was the main reason I felt that his direction was off with his driver. Now, if he did it and he learned to recenter everything in the transition so he could get back to a more center anchor delivery, he would have been fine. The drifters, the guys that are good drifting. He's not good at that. In my opinion, he plays best as a center anchor golfer. Of course, he went to front anchor for a while. With Foley, he went front anchor tilty. And again, he's not built to be that much of a tilter, so that puts stress on his back. And I don't think that's Foley's, doing necessarily. I think Tiger had a lot to say with any coach with what he was working on, and they were just his eyes and helping him get where he wanted to go. So I think that Tiger has a lot of say in that. That's just my opinion. I've never talked to him about it, so I don't know. But I have talked to the coaches, some of the other coaches, so I have sort of a feel for how that would work. And as a matter of fact, Foley and I had a conversation about that shortly before they ended up breaking up. I said, "You're kind of in a tough spot. He just won 8 times. He's more tilty than he needs to be. He wants to be able to play the draw again, but with the tilty move, he can only play the fade, and he wants to get back to that draw." And strokes gained, Mark Brody said that if he had an average putting year that year, he would have won something like 13 times in 2 majors. So I mean, what do? You're in a tough spot. And Sean was like, "Yeah, it kind of is, right?" I'm like, "Do you wait until he wins another major and then say, okay, we won another major, got that monkey off our back, let's get things to where you want it to be now, which is to be able to draw the ball again, And of course, then a lot of things happened after that, right? So I actually believe right now that Tiger's swing is the closest it's ever been to fitting his body mechanics. But unfortunately, his body's broken down.
Yes, when he came back before he won the Masters again in 19, when he came back in late 18 and played in the Hero, and I saw him swing, I was like, that's as close as I've seen him swing to when he was a kid, and to me it looked spot on.
Yeah, absolutely, and when he was a kid and up and through Stanford, his swing largely fit his body mechanics. 80% of it was where it needed to be. It only need to be tightened up in a few places, and I hope that in the future, that what will happen with a player like that is we'll be able to say, okay, let's screen you. There's a lot of great things that you're doing. We don't want to change those things, but that's fine. That 1 or 2 things that you need to do right now that's going to tighten things up for you without you losing speed. He's not losing any speed right now, even with his body the way it is. So from a biomechanical standpoint, he's doing a lot of things tremendously well. And which is good to see. I can only hope and pray that he gets healthier in his life, just so he can enjoy his golf the rest of life. Whether we have the pleasure of being him, see him play at a higher level again or not, I don't know. I certainly hope so. I truly believe that it's all physical at this point, meaning that if he can get his body to a place where he can physically maintain 4 rounds of tournament golf, that, and he could do that, 7 times a year or something like that, that we'll still see some brilliance out of him.
Hmm.
But that's just my selfish hope to be able to watch him play at that
Yeah,
level.
when he, for someone who's had back issues, and having an understanding, because talking to Dr. Geyer, Richard Geyer from the Texas Back Institute, I didn't ask him because he's not allowed to say if he worked on Tiger, but there was a very strong rumor in the golfing world that he was the one that performed the surgery. But talking to him about just backs in general, in infusions and things like that, and some other therapists and trainers and people in that field, they said that's not going anywhere. Eventually, if he's practicing hitting 500 balls a day, the disc above and below that fusion and everything else is going to start to give him trouble, but
Right.
not in the immediate future. But when he did that to his leg, and now you've got a bad back, even if it's bolted together, and you've got a faulty support structure, meaning his leg. Now
Hmm.
you're just there's even Tiger Woods is might succumb to that.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's ankle, it's knee, it's leg, I mean,
yes.
it's everything now, isn't it? Yeah, so it's just, we can only hope that he gets healthy enough to at least enjoy his golf the rest of his life. But yeah, I truly believe he is as close as he's ever been now to biomechanically owning his swing. And the part of owning your swing is functionality also. So we got structural, influences when we look at the biomechanics, what's going on. We have dynamic influences when we look at the biomechanics of what's going on, but we also have functional issues. So what we want to do is from a structural and dynamic standpoint, get it to where we're owning our swing as good as we can, and then we have to manage that within the functionality limitations that we have, which I think he's doing a great job of right now. And it's just, unfortunate that his body's not at a point where he can hold up for 4 rounds. At this point in time, it looks like. Hopefully, this was just a flu that he had at the last tournament.
Hmm.
I also heard that a couple other people, I don't know, maybe if there was food poisoning or something, because a couple other people got sick too, from what I've heard. So that's just
It was unfortunate for In-N-Out Burger that he was eating In-N-Out the day before, and then the
oh,
next day he
really?
gets sick. Yeah, that it made its rounds over social media, where he was getting the In-N-Out Burger, and he evidently doesn't like pickles, and he was pulling the pickles out, and everyone was saying, look, he's eating In-N-Out Burger, and it's famous, everybody knows about it. And then the next day when he got sick, there were some people making the memes and the post that
Wow, I didn't see
side
that.
by side. Yeah, it was fortunate for In-N-Out, and then it was maybe a little unfortunate for them
Unfortunate,
that
right?
that
Yeah.
was posted on there.
Yeah, well, we
Um,
played a tournament in college at Big Canyon Country Club in Irvine, and I had the worst food poisoning I've ever had. Had it for a week. My number 2 player on the team with me, he got it also. And then the next event we played in, we found out players from the other teams got it as well. So sometimes just something happens like that too. So who knows?
you had mentioned that, and we discussed how we both had it, where we fought the conventional wisdom of the industry, the coaching industry, at individual times, and had what seemed to be at that time ideas that were on the periphery or outside the box, as many people like to say it. Is there anything that you've been working on lately, or that you've been seeing over the course of time, that you're developing in your head, maybe that you'd be able to share at this
Yeah.
point, that
So
might go against the grain?
yeah. So certainly. Um, I think there's going to be more and more understanding of like when we're actually using our torques. I mean, years ago, I was with Chris Como in Kwan's office, and I had said that now that we're better understanding what's going on with the verticals, you got to get the torques in order. And they're like, oh no, we have those figured out. It's just the force couple in the feet, the feet pushing like this. And I said, really? So I go, how come I can stand up on my left leg only and I can play it just as far off my left leg only, or stand on my right leg only and play it just as far, and I can get torques into that foot to do that. Like you could literally do it on a force plate. And Dr. Kwan says, well, you can't. And Chris looked at Kwan and says, no, he can. So immediately it was like, oh yeah, we need to look into this, right? So this is also where I thought there's not enough understanding of frontal plane torques. Tilters have more frontal plane torques, horizontal, golfers more horizontal plane torques. So kind of how those things work together, and then just understanding how we use internal kinetics to put those torques into the ground. Okay, So like even if we're pushing with the feet, what internal kinetics are getting that done, right? If we're creating
Mhm.
frontal plane torques, what internal kinetics are getting that done? So I think there's going to be more understanding of this, yeah. And in a sense, it's going to seem like it's unconventional or events that against the current convention because it's going to be new understanding that's going to present new ways of doing things, just like John Tattersall bringing up an example, right? And which is a valid, very, very valid option. And I think if John and I talked and we talked about how this is a floating window, I think it would mesh directly exactly with what he was saying. We've never had
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I brought your stuff up when he was on the show, and he said he had heard of it and had kind of touched on it, but he had not looked at it extensively and was probably going to be reaching out to you at some
Yeah,
point.
and realistically, like I said, with when in bioswing dynamics, a lot of what we presented was agreed upon stuff. I mean, there's probably only even though a lot of my stuff, the 12 features and the vertical forces and synchronizing the vertical kinematic sequencing and all this stuff in there, they're less than half for sure of what I present because we weren't presenting all the dynamic patterns that I look at. And if you just go to the website and look at the basic list of dynamic patterns I list in
Yeah,
there,
it's a lot of them.
there's a lot in there. So yeah, I haven't had these conversations with a lot of these guys. I'm not around them, having time to talk to them about this stuff. But when I have the opportunity, it clarifies. It's not that anything else that's being done out there is wrong. It's just that it's presenting a version again of patterns that are valid. And then if we find something immediately that is outside that pattern that's also valid, that doesn't disprove this either. So this didn't
Hmm.
disprove that, but that didn't disprove this. They're both existing independently. So this kind of comes to mind when I was in college. So I was at UC San Diego studying philosophy, psychology, and philosophy, economics degrees, and a minor in psychology. So
Just
yeah,
make it
so
harder for yourself.
yeah, making it well. So I decided I was going to get a philosophy degree and a minor in psychology and keep it at that. My mom said I needed something practical to fall back on. And I said, well, I'll be a golf instructor. She says, well, you still need something practical to fall back on. So I got an economic degree for her. And it's actually called, they didn't have a business department. So it's called management science, which was their business degree in their economic department. Anyway, so I was in a philosophy class and we had to do a paper. And I wanted to show how egoism and subjectivism are consistent within a worldview. And the professor said, "Don't do this." And I said, "No." I said, "I really want to tackle this." And so Kant is an objectivist, a famous objectivist, and Hume is a famous subjectivist. And egoism is an objective philosophy. If you've ever read Ayn Rand, the Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, she
Hmm.
has what's called egoism. Most people don't understand what it really is. Like the foundation of egoism is that I would never do anything because it's an objective reality or objective belief. I would never do anything to somebody else that I didn't want them to do to me. Because if it's okay for me to do it to you, then it's okay for you to do it to me. From an objective worldview, that's the case. And if you have that type of mindset, philosophy, character, integrity, then you would never do something to somebody else that you didn't want them to do to you. And so that's like the ultimate objective view in my point of view at the time. So I want to show how that was consistent with subjectivity. And so what I did is I actually showed like get the old, here's a circle, right? Here's the whole
Hmm.
worldview. Inside the whole worldview, there's a bubble of subjectivity, and inside that view, there's a bubble of objectivity. And there's an area where they intersect, and where they intersect is where they're consistent with each other. And by the way, there's other philosophies and things in that
That all
worldview
overlap.
all over the place that overlap, right? And so I wrote this paper, and it was like supposed to be 10 pages. And if you wrote more than 10 pages, they had the right to just stop reading and grade you right then. And I remember I wrote 13 and I had to cut it off. And the professor literally called me in and he said, wow, he says, people have tried to prove this for centuries and nobody has, and you've just proven it.
Hmm.
And I want you to expand upon it more if you would come in and talk to me in my office. And I went in and we had like a 3 hour conversation about this. I don't know if he ever did anything with it, but So interesting. That's kind of what I'm looking at here, right? So if we look at certain views of posting, there those views of posting are within the biomechanical realm, right? And then we have these views of floating anchor systems, right? They're in the realm. There's a place where they overlap and they make a lot of sense with each other where they overlap. But trying to say that subjectivity rules the whole realm or objectivity rules the whole realm just is not correct. And so that's kind of the way I look at these discussions in golf. And so we're going to see, like, back to the where we started with this, when we're looking at how all these ground forces are being used, we're going to see things of dominance in legs. Like I actually screen to see, are you more trail leg dominant or are you more lead leg dominant? So for example, when I apply my vertical forces to the peak, I apply them almost equally through both legs.
Hmm.
And most of the industry right now doesn't believe you can do that. You have to do it purely through your lead leg. I have a student golf professional who I coach, who coaches within my use of the information, who has a bad left knee, and so we got him on the force plates. I showed him how to go vertical with his right leg, and he's been a right leg dominant person his whole life anyway. And as he reminds me, he picked up 12 miles an hour within 3 swings, and he sustained it ever since. And
Wow.
so these are the type of things where you don't necessarily need to train them to develop a motor skill pattern. You have a motor skill pattern, you have to use it. When you use it, you can access something like that very quickly.
Just has
And
to be identified.
yeah,
Let somebody realize that they have this. And
just need to be identified. And we're going to see more and more of that in the game. So that's one of the areas. This idea of tilts and horizontals, it's not accepted with a lot of people in the game right now, but I've seen how much it works. I've seen the evidence of it, and there's too much evidence for me to ignore it at this point in time. And it needs to be there. So there's other things. I call it your athletic sequence. So we have a dynamic activity where we are moving from a stabilized place to another stabilized place. Say so, like load in the backswing into your trail leg. This player drives off the trail leg into the lead leg. When they're driving off the trail leg to the lead leg, they're moving from a trail leg stable position to a lead leg stable position. And of course, creating stability in that all. But this, like, look at Dustin Johnson. He does this very actively and dynamically. But what about these golfers that are really, really stable? Have you ever been in a bunker where you just squat down, you get stable,
Mhm.
and you just swing your arms, and the ball goes further than normal? Well, wait, how did that work? Because we didn't use the power source that we're supposed to, like the Dustin Johnson, driving, loading, driving, opening your body as much as you can, all that sort of stuff, right? So there's different ways of stabilizing, and this is not, in my opinion, not addressed enough in the game. So if you went to like Chris Welch, for example, and had him train a golfer for stabilization, he's going to do a lot of stuff just really stable and learning to get energy to the distal end from a very stable
Yeah,
body. At least he used to. I'm not sure what his present stuff is, which is very, very, very valid. And there have been a couple of teaching systems out there that have said line up the joints, stay stable, and swing the arms, so to speak. So on one end of the continuum, you have these people that are very actively dynamic, moving, a lot of motion from one stable place to another stable place. And then you have these other people like Jimmy Walker, who from the top of the backswing gets stabilized, whips it through, and then his body follows his arms to the finish. So he's more on the stabilization side of the continuum. That's just my term for it right now, which I'm always open to have terms changed if scientifically we can have a good reason for it, right? And then we have guys like Sam Snead and Tiger and Hogan who are more in the middle, right? So they go back and they have their squat in the downswing, right? And they squat into the stabilization mode, and the arms are catching up as they're into that stabilization mode. And then it seems like everything sort of fires together through the ball from there. So I call these Dustin Johnson athletic sequence 1, Jimmy Walker athletic sequence swing 3, Tiger, Snead, athletic sequence 2. In the middle, there's a continuum there. 1, 1.25, 1.5, 1.75. So there's a continuum there. So identifying how this works and stabilization, how you're utilizing stabilization throughout the dynamic activities in your swing is largely, what I'm talking about when I talk about your athletic sequence. There's sequencing involved in that also, but it's what sets it up is really the stabilization mode. So this is something that I don't think has been researched enough, discussed enough, looked into enough, I think we're going to see a lot of more of that come out in the future as well. I had a couple other in my head, but what just jumped into my mind from the inner game standpoint, because I'm an inner game coach also. I've been an inner
Mm-hmm.
game coach since '86. The biggest thing in the inner game is understanding how the subconscious mind is onboarded with an intention. And so if the subconscious mind does not fully accept the intention, we have conflict in the mind. So there's not a meeting of the minds. There's literally a battle there. And whenever there's conflict there, we feel tension. We feel a lot of things like anxiety and stuff come into play. So learning how to get the subconscious mind fully on board with what's going on is like the number one thing of actually being to access the flow as readily as possible. If there is conflict there between conscious and subconscious, it's very, very hard to get to the flow.
Mm-hmm.
So, one other thing that relates to this is that just like we have scar tissue from injuries that we've had, most people have scar tissues from emotional and mental levels. The mind's an onion, a lot of levels of the mind, and human beings are messy and we have our emotions, but we have a lot of scar tissue in those areas. And nobody's done a lot of good work up to this point about how do we get people through the scar tissue. In the psychology industry, there's been two approaches mainly over time. Number one, you have to go back and revisit everything and relive it all to get past it, which I don't believe you have to do. That was just a way of getting there, and it works for some people, but it doesn't work for a lot of people. The other way is actually just having sort of the mindset that everything that's happened behind me does not, determine who I am, and it certainly doesn't predict the future. I can just wake up every morning and go in the direction and leave all that behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically just accepting it happened. It wasn't my responsibility. I don't have to take responsibility for all that stuff that happened. I can be the person I want to be and just go forward. Kind of two ends of the spectrum is where
Very much.
these ways have been going, attacking it, right? So I do work with students on this stuff, and I have my own theories and approaches to go about this, but helping people get beyond that. But the number one thing that has to happen, just like anything or 12-step programming, you have to accept that it's there and it's creating an issue. I have tour players that just don't want to address it. I've had players in other sports I've worked with over the years that don't want to address it. They think it's like a flaw and they can't admit it. It's going to make them weak, and all this emotional garbage comes along with it, right? But you certainly, I've done it personally in my life because I've had a lot of things happen to me in my life that I've used the techniques to get beyond. Like most people who really get to know me and we have a conversation someday, they're like, man, I would have never guessed any of that ever happened to you in your life with your attitude and everything. So it's like, but I've studied it just like I wanted a degree in psychology for a reason, I guess. It was my own personal, quest. But I've studied a lot of it. And I think that there's lots of information out there in motor skill development studies, in neurological studies. I give lessons to people that are neurological researchers and stuff. And I talked about this stuff, and they're like, wow, we have some evidence that would point in that direction. And they tell me about it. But I think that that's these two things, understanding how do we get the subconscious mind onboarded with any intention that we have, so that we can access the flow more readily. And
Mm-hmm.
how do we actually do a better job of cleansing ourselves, so to speak, of this emotional and mental scarring that happens? Because that directly makes it hard for the subconscious mind to get on board with new intentions often.
Do you think that the scarring might not go away because it's the body or the brain's way or the soul's way of telling the individual that you haven't learned what you need to from that situation, and until you do, we're going to nag you about it.
Yeah,
And then
there's.
once you have an understanding of how to handle that situation, then and in the meantime, which is the difficult part because you're working on trying to figure out something that you're in the dark about that's behind you, as you describe it, and you're working on something that's in front of you so you can continue growing and going forward. When you are able to identify what it is and learn what you do, whether it's a feel or something that you're able to put that behind you, maybe you spend some time by yourself or enough time that you give it. I hate to beat up that word deep thought again or those
Mm-hmm.
words, but you in your own way, however you need to. The same way someone learns how to hit a chip shot or a putt or a full swing, that they need to hit. That once you learn how to do that, then you can set that down, and it's in the past, and now you're able to continue going forward without that baggage weighing you down. And maybe this is just my anecdotal response to this: is that until that happens, it is going to be difficult, and things are not going to be as efficient and smooth and in the flow that you want. But if I realize that it's not going to be, and you will find the answer so long as it's in you to find to look for it, not focus on it.
Yeah.
But maybe it pops into your head. But when your head hits the pillow one night, and you're like, "Holy shit, that's the answer," or it pops up to you at some random point in your life, it will go away. Or at least it will stop nagging you to allow you to grow in the way that you want to move forward.
Yeah,
That's
there is a huge integral part of that for sure. I mean, is it the one thing? No, not necessarily, but is it a big part of it? Absolutely. And like I work on my own personal growth every single day, and I have
mhm.
one of the top sports psychologists in Illinois comes to take lessons with me, and I work specifically with her on sports psychology. Like everybody needs somebody, right? And like it's the right before the last lesson she came in, she says, "You're in a better place now even than you were last time." And I've grown and I've learned more, and because we talk about these things, we all have things we need to learn in life. Do you believe you're here for a reason? Is it random or whatever? I believe there's things we're here to learn. I actually believe before we come into this life that we actually have a contract, and until that contract is solved, those things you need to learn, are not solved, but until the contract is upheld, so to speak, until you learn those things that you're supposed to learn or do in the contract, these things will keep coming back around, right? And a lot of things point to it. How do you react in a given situation? Do you have a pet peeve driving? How do you react when those things show up driving? I guarantee you it's pointing to one of these things in there somewhere. And is some of this is it relates to the scarring stuff because we can go back and see where the scars came from. But some of it is just sort of the pulls of my learning in life that we go through. And so I have, I've got 28 books I've written. I've got outlines for another 12 that I haven't been able to work on actually in 15 years, honestly.
I'm not
I've
laughing at
got,
you. I'm just saying
I
it's
got,
not surprising that you've got all
yeah,
this information you're trying to get out of your head.
I got six
Make
books.
room for more.
Yeah, six books that are between 70 and 80% completed that I haven't been able to work on. And I have two storybooks I started many, many years ago. One's called Out of the Shadows, which relates to this sort of scarring, sort of thing. And one's Fairways to Eternity. And so, again, which is life lessons, so to speak. So I do have a book called Life Lessons Self-Help for Golfers, and another one called Focus on Golf, Creating the Golfer's Edge that really pertain to these aspects. And then I have one other book that I'm writing, which is through 18 holes of golf. Every hole is a pole of learning in life, which is kind of
Very
what we're
interesting.
talking about here. Until you learn that lesson, every time you go to that hole, you're going to have this, it's going to be your nemesis hole sort of thing, right? Until
Yes.
you figure out what you're supposed to figure out, then all of a sudden that hole is no longer a nemesis hole, is it? And
You know,
so I think there's a ton of that.
Chris Williamson has Modern Wisdom podcast, and I'm a fan of his, and he's gone viral. I don't know how many millions of downloads he has now, but it's very interesting. It's he has on guests, similar to Joe Rogan. He's had on Jocko and Huberman and um, Jordan Peterson and Hermosi and all these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that one of his posts that I continue to see over and over, or a topic that they go over along the lines of what we're talking about, is he says if something's keeping you up at night or irritating you on a daily basis, it's most likely the thing that you're not paying attention to that you need to go take care of.
Absolutely.
And it makes you uncomfortable that you
That's
don't
right.
want to do it, but you need to go do it.
That's right. And it's easy to procrastinate and push it down the line because you're uncomfortable at dealing with it and addressing it. And eventually it creates more problems if it's not addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting. It kind of goes along with the Goggins, the be uncomfortable on a daily basis, and the reason for the ice baths and the reasons to go rucking and go to the gym and continue growing and learning and doing something that makes you uncomfortable on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, if you're not accepting of learning in uncomfortable situations, then when you most need those skills or those aptitudes that you have to apply in life to get where you want to go, you're not going to have them show up in those moments when you
Hmm.
are uncomfortable and you really need them. If
Yep.
you can get yourself to learn to practice them and use them when you're in those uncomfortable environments, then you're prepared for every option. I mean, it's special forces training, Navy SEAL training. This is what they do. They learn to operate in the most uncomfortable situations, in the most adverse situations, so that when they have a plan and they're operating, that they can deal with all the things that are going to show up that the plan didn't look into. Right? It's like
Yep.
when the helicopter went down, and people say it's amazing how they adapted. When they ended up blowing up the one helicopter and they got Bin Laden and they got out of there and everything. And people are like, it's just amazing they did that. And if you ever talk to anybody there, they'll say what, but they actually planned 1,000 times. If both helicopters went down, what are we going to do?
Hmm.
They were prepared
Yeah,
for it.
they're as prepared as they possibly can be.
Yeah, exactly. That's the goal, to be as prepared as you
I
possibly
think
can.
that was where the discussion at the end of open forum was going. That I believe you were there because I was about 10 feet away. I didn't get to introduce
Oh
myself then,
yeah,
but you remember that Foley was talking about SEAL training and elite forces,
right,
and
right.
that's where it was going. And I think everyone was kind of worn out by that point.
Yeah,
They've been
and I
in there
don't.
6 hours.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Sean. When I actually brought something up, I'm not sure he kind of got where I was going, because he kind of went exactly in the opposite direction. I've talked to him
Hmm.
before, so I know that he understood what I was saying. But it's just like the idea of Izzy Justice in his study and understanding where the mind needs to be at optimal performance level. I wasn't saying that you have to get people to optimum performance level. What I'm saying is there's studies on this showing where are we when we're at our optimal performance level. Then there's lots of things you do, because Izzy actually trained Navy SEALs. So there's actual things that you have to do, that when you're not at that level, how can you bring the frequency of your brain, the actual brain itself, back down closer to that level. And then when you've brought it down close to that level and you've operated there and you found how to perform really well when you're not at an optimum level, physiologically, then you actually are even in a better place to overcome things. So it's just like breathing. Ideally we have these deep breaths, not shallow breaths. And we have proper breathing, and when we're breathing properly, it's easier to perform ideally. But when I'm not there, what can I do? I can actually get it in a better state, and then I can learn what are my tendencies, when I'm in that state to perform well. So I have a student who's out of college now, going to go to tour school and making some changes. And every time we make some adjustments, he just plays terribly. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way, because I've coached him into how to play in the flow. And so what happens is he makes these changes, but they're not completely instilled yet, and the subconscious mind's not completely on board. And he stands up there and he just goes into the flow mode, and he hopes that good shots are going to show up, but the subconscious mind doesn't trust it. So the flow mode
Hmm.
gets disrupted and bad shots go. Look, there's a place in between. You actually can have a mechanical cue and blend that with some flow, and be the difference between a combined mechanics and flow state can still get you to play at the highest level or perform at the highest level. It may not be as effortless as it was if you truly had acceptance of the new technique and you were at the highest flow level, but it's going to be where it needs to be to win and perform and compete and all that sort of stuff, right? And so that's kind of part of it, is understanding again that things aren't always optimal. Things were messy, right? And so when things aren't at the optimal level, how do I adjust? How do I overcome? How do I adapt, right? So that I can operate at a level that is acceptable with all that other stuff going on.
Yeah, I think. What was the guy that wrote Tribes, the book Tribes? He was a,
Oh yeah.
uh,
Um,
and then he did the documentary where he went with the Marines over to
right.
Afghanistan. Or, what is his name? I can see his
That's kind
face.
of too.
But he had spent time. God, what was the name of that documentary? Because there was special forces guys there, and there was regular. Uh, Pardon my lack of terminology. Regular Marines
Right.
were at this space or stationed as well. And what he found out was that, given the training that they went through, that all the special forces guys' anxiety level was peaking out when they weren't engaged, when they were just
Interesting,
walking
right?
around the base. But all of the Marines, regular, again, bad
Foot soldiers,
terminology besides,
Marines.
uh, they were just fine. Their anxiety levels were low. But once they got into action, the special forces guys' mental capacity calmed down, and the other forces guys' anxiety ramped up, just
Yeah,
because they're in their comfortable state.
right.
The Marines were used to doing stuff on base more often, and the Special Forces were used to being put in very uncomfortable situations, and now it gets reversed. You're put in a comfortable situation, and and that's not a knock on the Marines. It's just
No, no, no.
the things that they're trained for on a day, or what they're doing on a daily basis. And I think that gets back to, you got to do something, not just something that's uncomfortable, something that you don't want to do, but you have
Yeah,
to.
yeah. It's part of proper preparation, right? I mean, like Nicholas says, preparation is 90% of the battle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what goes into being prepared? What goes into, like one day I remember in college where it was raining in San Diego. It doesn't rain a lot in San Diego, but it was me and another player on the team who was from Germany out practicing in the rain, and we're the only two practicing in the rain. And he turns around and looks at me. He goes, "Where's the rest of the team?" And I said, it doesn't rain here very much. They just figure it'll be nice tomorrow. He's like, yeah, but we're going to have to play in the rain someday. I go, that's why you and I are here. Right. But interesting. Right. And so,
Very.
a lot of that, like how many people like putting balls in bad divots or, stuff like that, standing on uneven lines. So I take divot lines. I've been doing divot lines since the 90s, and I was on my own lesson tee, and I filled sand, and I realized that divot lines that grew back faster, so that's why I did it. So I take a divot line, and then I walk towards the divot line and make the next divot line, and I walk towards it. Eventually, I'm standing in my own divot lines, and people are like, "What are you doing?" I go, "You know what? I don't even recognize it anymore." I don't recognize these uneven lies and all this sort of stuff. And if it's a little downhill, a little uphill, I just stand the way I need to stand based upon the terrain. I figure out how I need to swing with the slope. I make my swing with the slope. I see what the ball does, and then I play it. I'm not trying to make it be perfect or make it be something other than it is. And so, like those type of things is stuff that, like you say, doing that stuff on a daily basis, it actually opens your mind to more possibilities, and it doesn't need things to be in a nice, clean, described, matrix, if you want to put it that
Yeah.
way. So
More
that you can,
malleable.
yeah, exactly, and we need a lot of that in our life.
I think we touched on a lot of different things, and we've blown
Yeah,
through 2.5 hours. It doesn't even seem like that's usually how
that's
it goes.
fine.
But if you got a few minutes, I can do the emergency 9. I call
Yeah,
it that. Just random questions, and I tell everybody everyone's familiar with it now. The first and the last everyone gets, but everything in between kind of varies over time. So we'll jump in, and I'll let you get going. I'm sure you have some more. You got books and other things to focus on and get you out of the podcast. So this one I frame based off where somebody is. So you're here in the States, and if so, let's say you started playing, you're playing more and you're playing better, and you won a national club pro, you get in a tour event, you win the PGA championship, and they say, EA, we want you to play in the Ryder Cup. And so you're going to walk up to the first hole, and what song are you going to have them start cranking over the PA system to get the crowd and everyone all fired up?
well, that's interesting. It's funny. I listen to music on my iPod, but I wouldn't say I've been a really big music person. Um, One of my favorite ones is "Dream On," though.
That's a cool song. That's all right. We'll go with that one. What would be your superpower?
I would have to say perspective. Just
Okay,
having a very open perspective.
I would agree with that 1,000%. Especially talking to her 2.5 hours and following you for years. Let's see. You're in California, so Hollywood comes to you and says, "We've been following your career for a very long time. We really like it. We want to make a movie about it, and we're going to let you pick any actor to play you in the movie. Who are you going to tell them to pick?"
It better be Bruce Willis. I mean,
Yeah, you and I following challenged. When when Doug Laurie came out a couple weeks ago, and people said, "Well, where'd you meet him?" And I said, "We met at the barbershop."
right?
Let's see. Let me. starting to take better notes. So at some point I'll use these for something, just something fun as a post on social media. This one I'm curious to hear your answer. Best purchase you've made in the last year under $1,000. Could be golf related, could be training aid, could be just something you can use around the house.
Honestly, it's called LifeWave, and so it's their LifeWave is a company that had produced a lot of different patches. And Navy SEAL and is the founder of the company and everything. So I use two different patches. One's called X9 and X39, and the other one's X49. You start with the X39, and it's actually a patch that actually helps stimulate peptides and stem cell growth in your body. And interestingly enough, a lot of the old injuries and things that I had when I started wearing it, I felt weird things going on there. And all of a sudden, like stiffness and pain and stuff that used to be go along with just old injuries are gone. I was hit by a car in a crosswalk on my left ankle, fell back, and the tire or the wheel stopped on my foot. I fell back. I tore a bunch of ligaments in my left ankle, and it would crack every day and be sore. I don't feel anything there anymore. Have it on my website. You can go see some of the basics there. But LifeWave, their products are incredible, and it's for both patches, it's less than $200 a month for me. So, but I just started with the one patch, which was, $100 something bucks a month. So I know
Very
over a
cool.
year it ended up being more than that. But as far as the initial investment being 3 months to convince me that this is something I needed to continue to do, it was less than $400.
All right. Well, I'll put a link to that in the summary, and someone wants to check that out. I'll
Yeah.
have a one-click link to it. Your favorite, in your opinion, best golf movie? Which one would you say is your favorite?
Best golf movie. Um, I go back to Bag of Rants a lot. I may have to stick with that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
That one's been all over the map. There is no clubhouse leader on that one.
yeah, I mean, obviously there's comedy and there's just pure entertainment. I think the philosophical and educational side of it for me rings home. Obviously, strokes of genius and the greatest game ever played. There's lots of good things in all those. I love overcoming stories. So I mean, Top Gun Maverick, Man from Snowy River, Bagger Vance. I mean, go down the list of all these overcoming movies that just get your emotions and your heart going. I love them. So I think Bagger Vance probably hits home more for me as far as that's concerned.
Okay, perfect. Uh, 24 hours. You've got to hit a hole in one. If you do it, you get $5 million. If you don't, you can't play golf ever again. Are you gonna take? Are you gonna take the challenge?
Do I get a chance of warming up before that 24
Oh,
hours?
yeah, yeah. You got 24 hours, and you can warm up before it, and we'll just say it's 125 to 150 yards.
Um, Tough question. I truly believe I can do it because I've actually been there before. So I had something very strange happen a couple of years ago. I was practicing on the range. It was blowing really hard. I had 9-iron out, and I got into a mode. I get into these modes, so being able to get in the modes, get yourself there is the important thing. But anyway, played this 9-iron, went in the hole. Played another one, looked like it went in the hole. Played another one, looked like it went in the hole. Played another one, looked like it went in the hole. I'm like, there's no freaking way. I played a fifth one, and all of a sudden I see this ball leaning against the pin out of the hole, 5 in a row. I drove my cart out to because we have actual greens at Olympia Fields there, and damn, there were 5 balls in the hole in a row. Never had that happen. I've made 10 hole-in-ones. I predicted 6 of them, literally predicted them, and had the wherewithal to stand there and do it. I need to be in a certain state. If I'm not in that state, the answer is no. I love golf too much. I'm a gambler, but I'm not that much of a gambler. But if I was anywhere near in one of those modes, I would say I'd take the chance.
Okay, cool. That's a very cool story. Let's see. If you could stick any franchise, food franchise or restaurant in your kitchen, who would you put in there?
Hmm. Well, it would either have to be In and Out, or it would, no matter what happened with Tiger, it'd either have to be In and Out or Panda Express. But
In and out.
I'd have to make Panda Express go gluten free.
All right. In and out is the leader by far on this one.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm gluten free. I have food allergies, so the wraps from In and Out Burger, you just can't beat them.
I haven't had one. I got to get out there. I've been to California a couple times, but I did not get in and out. It was weekends, and it was for an event or something, or to see somebody, and I never got in and out. I got to make another trip out just to have
Absolutely.
a burger. Who would be on your coaching Mount Rushmore?
Oh, so I think Butch Harmon's one of the best coaches ever in the game. And I don't think from a swing technique standpoint, I think he's the one of the best at getting the most out of his players.
Hmm.
He knows how to coach players into performance.
Yeah, as much a psychologist as he is a
Yeah.
swing coach.
He knows how to pump their confidence. He knows how to just give them one or two things. He knows how to help them understand what they're doing well and what they need to stay away from and play their strengths and away from their weaknesses and keep them confident and get them understanding that they really are a racehorse.
Hmm.
He would certainly be there. Manuel de Toro.
Wow, that's an old one there.
I
I
mean,
remember
I
him.
think probably underrated in many, many different ways. I think a lot of the classics like you could get from the Percy Boomers and classic era instructors kind of get all wrapped up into him. So he certainly would be right up there. Um, the lineage up that Jack Grout had right up through Jack Grout, and unfortunately, I don't think he got to put enough out there. I think there's a lot of tremendous stuff in the lineage through Jack Grout. So I think that I'd put him up there at the top as well. Going over to England, Henry Cotton I think is sort of a underrated coach as well. Right, one more, or was that?
Oh, that's four. Yeah, that's a pretty
There you
impressive
go.
list.
Yeah, so I think that I think that understanding a lot of the history of and what came out of those guys, where they came from and what came out of what they did
Hmm.
is a big portion of really what's valid in the game that's not being discussed enough.
Yeah, that's a coach question. That one goes in and out. If they're not a coach, I really don't ask that. But there's so many good answers for that
Yeah,
one. I always just curious to see what each coach is going to say.
yeah.
And then the last one, this one is everyone has gotten from the first episode ever done. In your opinion, as far as golfers, who's the GOAT, greatest of all time?
Well, I still think it's Jack. Um, you know, I don't know if that's because of being old school. Obviously, I don't take anything away from Tiger.
Hmm.
But look, I mean, if we look at majors has always been the standard, it's got to be Jack. And I mean, Tiger's broken a lot of other records as well. Different eras, different times. I think it's tough to rate people across eras. But if
Hmm.
we're going to continue to say majors is the standard, then it's got to be Jack in that respect.
Yeah, Tiger's taking the lead on that. Now you're the 133rd episode. I'd say Tiger's probably ahead 60%, 40%.
Right.
But it's closer than many things. And I think you mentioned generation. I think it has gone generation. So most people over, let's say 50, I think Jack would have the lead in that
Right.
demographic, and most people under 50 have said Tiger, which
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, because you can, if you start delving into statistics, how many events did they actually play and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's so many things that are close, their win percentages, and okay, Tiger's got a few more wins, as far as that's concerned, but he's got less majors, and okay, he's got more amateurs than the juniors, but Nicholas didn't play in the juniors, and he did win an amateur. So it's like there's just a mix and a match, right? And
Hmm.
they're pretty. I mean, if you really look at their ability to close out, being in position, they're pretty darn equal as
Yep.
far as that's concerned. And some people would argue that you know, even though the field wasn't as deep, the top of the field was deeper when Nicholas was doing it, and not as deep when Tiger. Like, so there's all these arguments that come into play, right?
Yes, and
And so
it's a never-ending argument.
yeah,
It's
so
the
I
same
think
as in basketball.
yeah, so that's why I'm like, you got to, if you're going to ask me the question, or people are going to ask the question to have a reasonable discussion, we have to define what parameters make them be the GOAT. And if it seems like majors has always been a part of the discussion, and if that's the number one defining feature, then I would say it would have to go to Jack.
Yeah, that's why I ask. It's a very interesting
Yeah,
discussion.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
what do you have coming up? Anything that you can tell everybody about that they can sign up for, watch you, uh, get in touch with you on?
Yeah, so I'm waiting for these to be finalized, but it looks like April 2nd in San Antonio, we're going to have a coach's education, a 1 day coach's education on Tuesday. And then April 22nd and 23rd, I'm going to host a 2 day education for coaches at Olympia Fields. And so I'm putting all that together right now. I've invented 15 training aids over the years, and I've made them all by hand. I've got a project right now. So by the end of May, I'll have a new website set up where I'll actually be selling some of those products on there. I have a hoop to hole system. So, people putt through hoops.
Mm-hmm.
So I had the original system, was doing it in the 90s, called hoop to hole. One of the hoops is what's called the thump hoop. So you actually learn aim square, return square, and deliver the energy. You don't knock the hoop over. So like the flight deck idea came out of this. Utley used my hoop for a long time, really loves it. So I have a bunch of drills that go along. There's actually 4 hoops in the full system, and there's a putting string that comes with it. I have this actually hoop or this thump gate also. So there's 5 different versions of combinations of things that you can buy together, but all of them come with training programs. This is really sort of the beauty of it. There's video lessons that come with all of it. Not only drills to use with the training aids, but also drills without the training aids. And so those will be available, by the end of April. I have a sure stroke putting trainer I patented in '94, so I'm going to be selling that again. I've got ropes you may be familiar with. I sell
Yeah, I
training
saw those.
ropes, so
Those are cool.
speed ropes and core ropes. And what I found out years ago, because with a golf machine, we would swing ropes. But what I found out is that the really good athletic players got a lot out of swinging the ropes, but the average person didn't. And
Hmm.
so I figured out that actually reconstructing ropes with links and certain weights made a big difference, in actually having a handle built into the rope, because you put force in the handle. If there's no handle, how do you put force in the handle? So I make these ropes that are actually custom made for the individual based upon your height and your 7-iron carry distance. And so those will be one of the products that will be more readily available with training as well. And then the last one is what I call the swing wiffle. So those are the 4 that I'm going to start with. And then once we get that set up, I'm going to start adding some more. And so there will be a new website, e-commerce website, for those products and for the training programs that go along with them.
Cool. I've got 2 websites for you. I'll have both of those in the summary. But best one that people to reach you on.
Yeah, go to newhorizonsgolf.com, and then that's the main one, which, like the original website, it's supposed to be replacing the original website, so I'm slowly building that out. They can get my contact information from that. And then the second one, makingyourgolfsimple.com, is
Mm-hmm.
actually a content video lesson content website. So there's modules there, essential core lessons. Even if you're a beginner, get involved with that. If you want to be a better ball striker, golf swing cornerstones. If you want to understand how to control ball flight better, there's a section called Understanding Your Lefts and Your Rights. And I make it very simple story. If your ball's curving to the left, your left influences were stronger than your rights. If they're
Mm-hmm.
curving to the right, your right influences are stronger than your lefts. And if they're kind of where you want them, they're more complementing each other. So there's a whole, whole bunch of information around how to manage all that. There's a fundamentals section, power stacking. If you're interested in power golf from the ground up, there's a power stacking section. There's playing in the flow, which is the intergame stuff. And then lastly, there's an own your swing module, which is all the biomechanical stuff in there. I have my screenings in there, all that in the own your swing section. So all the biomechanical stuff's in there. You can actually sign up for each module individually, or you can purchase the full membership. Either way.
Awesome. And handles on, I know you're on Twitter and Instagram because that's where I
Yeah, so EA Tischler on Twitter, at EA Tischler on Instagram, EA Tischler Golf on Instagram, BioSwing Dynamics on Instagram, Edward A. Tischler on Facebook, and then I have a New Horizons Golf Approach page on Facebook as well.
Cool. And I'll link all those. I might miss one. That's a lot
Yeah,
of
it's
them.
all good.
I'll link as many as I can. Give people that they can get you at one click. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's been great. I thank you very much for coming on. It's been very fun. When I'm going to be up in Chicago again because of a lot of family up there, I'll reach out ahead of time and hopefully we can connect up there too.
Yeah, I hope to see you there. And, if ever we want to do it again and, maybe stick to certain topics instead of jumping around as much as we did, I'd be more than happy to do that as well.
Well, it's a good intro for everybody to get a broad scope of what you do, and yeah, we'll do definitely we'll do it again, and we'll pick a topic next time and focus on one.
Sounds good.
Cool. Just hang out for 1 second if you don't mind.
Yeah. No, I'm good. I'm good. Well, the record's still going on this end, so it says I see the red dot and the red phone, the red thing with the phone icon. Yeah, it's still running on this end. It's clicking away 2 hours, 46 minutes, 26, 27, 28. And then it says 98% on this end. Uh-oh. Jeff Smith calls me the technology poltergeist. Yeah. Yeah, sure, that'll work. Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thanks. Yeah, you too. Look forward to catching up down the road somewhere.
Just walking home from work now, but excited that we're going to get you to San Antonio. So we're all set. My GM's excited you're coming. So looking forward to it, but just wanted to finalize everything and see when you wanted to come in and everything. And, we just moved. I like a 2-minute walk to the club. And you could stay in our little guest suite that we have upstairs if you want to do that, or if you want to get a hotel, whatever. But we're right by the club here, and we got like a nice guest suite up there. So you're more than welcome to stay with Kelly and I there. And looking forward to setting everything up. Thanks, buddy. Bye.